Good evening, everyone. In accordance with the Open Public Meetings Law, notification of this meeting has been sent to our official newspapers and other publications circulated within the borough, and notice posted on the bulletin board at Borough Hall. Please note the fire exits, which are to the entrance of the council chamber and to the rear. Roll call, please.
Mayor Kramer?
Here.
Councilman Benazzi?
Here.
Councilman Boyce?
Here.
Councilman Carnazza?
Here.
Councilman Gallagher?
Here.
Councilman Guan?
Here.
Councilman Yu?
Here. Would you all please rise and join me in a salute to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we move on, I understand Mr. Regan, the counsel for the planning board, would like to bring up a point.
Thank you, Mayor, and members of the council. Good evening. Robert Regan, attorney for the Old Planning Board, as most of you know. I've been advised that the governing body intends to open tonight's proceeding for comments by members of the public. With all due respect, I think that's improper. It's inappropriate under the statute, which is Section 17 of the Municipal Land Use Law. I'll just read what New Jersey Zoning and Land Use Administration says about that. It should, on an appeal, it should be emphasized that the statute provides that the appeal to the governing body shall be decided only upon the record established before the Board of Adjustment. In other words, the governing body on appeal cannot reach out and obtain new and undisclosed evidence which was not before the board. So I think to take statements and comments from members of the public, while it may be a good intention on the governing body's part, I think it's illegal, and I think it jeopardizes any decision you make one way or the other in connection with the appeal. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. We have a very capable attorney who knows the process.
Mayor, I would advise the governing body that it is clearly up to the governing body as a whole to decide whether or not they want to accept comments. Mr. Regan is, of course, correct, and I think that was in my letter to the governing body, that the only thing that the governing body can consider is evidence that was adduced during the hearing before the planning board. So to the extent that people would come up and make comments, if it was considered evidential, it would be improper for you to hear. So,
Brian, could I just say?
sure.
So, and it could taint the process going forward. It does go forward.
Yes. The only thing I would suggest is, if you were going to accept comments from the public, that you do it after you've made a decision. That would not be inappropriate.
Mr. Gittens, could I just put something on the record as well?
You want to recognize?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Gail Price from the firm of Price, May, Schulman, and Dominio on behalf of the applicant below before your planning board, Capital Senior Housing. I want to join with Mr. Regan, having spent the better part of, I guess it was a little bit more than a year here with your board and with all of your residents who have come out in connection with the application. It is certainly contrary to the municipal land use law to accept anything outside the record, and I join with Mr. Regan, but I also want to go a step further and indicate that I am very much concerned about correspondence that I received a copy of that was circulated not only to the residents, but suggested that additional correspondence be sent to each of you in connection with this application. So to the extent that you've received telephone calls, letters, emails, anything, which also would be discoverable in a subsequent action, no matter which way that this goes, I have a significant legal concern with that. I also have a significant legal issue with the manner in which the appellants have gone forward in bringing extra stuff into the record, and we can address that during argument's sake. But I wanted at the outset just to raise those because I haven't, in 40 plus years of practice, have not come up against having the volume of these things outside the record being brought up before a governing body appeal. And I think it's in everyone's best interest, your interest as the governing body, everyone who's here this evening's interest, certainly my client, and your planning board who spent all the time hearing the case. So, thank you.
Ms. Price, just so you're aware, the mayor and council have told me that they received correspondence, emails, et cetera, and I have advised them in the past that they cannot consider it in making their decision tonight. I'm confident that they will not.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, if I could just one other thing. Ms. Price, you can imagine that whether it's a parking issue or lights on a field or something like that, we get thousands of emails on all sorts of subjects. So to our attorneys, to Brian's recommendation there, they came into our inbox and they left our inbox. So we understand the sensitivity of those. And I think I can speak for the rest of the councils that, yeah, they're not under consideration.
I get it.
But residents are always going to send emails.
I get it. I was planning board attorney in Ridgewood for 16 years, and I've been in Harrington Park for 30. So I'm also going to ask for a ruling, Mr. Giblin, at some point in time that we all keep our respect levels going, that we're all looking for the right thing to be done in a very respectful manner.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Price. Well, from my point of view, early on, with regard to this, I started to receive emails myself. So,
Can you speak a little louder, please? You can't hear.
Sure.
In here.
but that I got two of them now.
So make it louder, it just records it.
If I could give you this one, too.
Okay, so over the course of the past year, I've received numerous emails as well. As Councilman Gallagher has pointed out, have I read them? Sure, I've read them. It's just natural course to read them. I don't know what else the public could add to what has already been filtered into our heads at this point in time. And I too recognize the fact that this hearing is to be based on the record of the planning board and nothing else. And that's what my plan is. That's what I will base my decision on tonight. So I'll listen to the rest of the council as to whether or not they would have feelings to the contrary and allow it to be open to the public, but I pass that on to the council.
My comment would be, I'm just wondering, when would have been the public's opportunity to comment on this, if not tonight?
During the planning board hearing.
So they had no reason to come to the mayor and council to talk about this issue? Either way.
When the application was filed with the planning board had exclusive jurisdiction over the application the entire time until it made a decision. That would have been the place for anyone to bring comments or evidence.
But now it's under the mayor and council's.
But with no additional evidence permitted. Correct.
Planning board's not elected.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it if you would withhold your comments, please.
I, for one, would like to hear from the residents.
Okay, would you care to put that into a motion?
I will make a motion that we open up the meeting to the public before the testimony that we're going to hear tonight.
Do I hear a second?
I will second that, asking our residents, it is a 3-minute timer. I do, again, ask for respect from both sides and state what you'd like to say, and then leave it to the next person to make some comments, and then we'll get into testimony. So it's, yeah.
I want to make a comment that it is our job only to use testimony and the evidence that was shown through the planning board process, et cetera. I think we would be responsible enough to make sure that if there's any new evidence, we don't use that in our decision-making today. So I am open to the public speaking. Just make sure that there's no new evidence. We cannot consider that in this process.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Councilman Benagi?
No.
Councilman Boyce?
No.
Councilman Carnazza?
No.
Councilman Gallagher?
Yes.
Councilman Guan?
Yes.
Councilman Yu?
Yes.
Aye.
We're on the hot seat, Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'm a law-abiding guy. It's been my career. I take the laws that's printed, and I'm going to err on the side of caution as presented by our planning board's attorney. So the comments will be heard after the decisions.
No. Bye.
So I will call upon,
Mayor, if I could just
Sure,
put something on the record. So, in accordance with the scheduling that that the mayor and council set forth for this, last Wednesday was the date for submission of written position papers. We received one from the applicant's attorney. We did not receive one on Wednesday, but we did receive one tonight from the appellants. Then both sides are also permitted to argue what they believe the evidence at the planning board showed. So the appellants get to go first if they want to make an oral presentation. Not sure.
Do you need to swear in or anything
You
like that?
don't need to be sworn, but just put your name and address on the record.
Sure. It's Sherry Ponero, 256 Old Pan Road.
First, I'd just like to say that what we handed you guys is our oral presentation. It's,
Your name and address.
I'm sorry, Patrick Gambuti Jr., 16 Autumn Lane, Otapan. So if you wanted to follow along with our oral presentation, it is not any different than what we're saying.
We marked it into,
So,
clerk has marked it in, so it's a
okay, we
public document.
thought that would be appropriate to
We
do.
just did it as a courtesy.
Yeah.
We thought it made sense. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you know, we're gathered tonight to review the reasons for the appeal that we filed, asking for the council to overturn the planning board approval of the applicant's request to develop 244 Old Tappan Road. We've learned a lot this year and a half. We've learned it's not uncommon for zoning boards of adjustment and planning boards to routinely be asked to grant use variances for what are commonly referred to as inherently beneficial uses. I'm sure you're aware, as a legal term of art, inherently beneficial uses represent a class of uses that are so beneficial to society that they are deemed to automatically satisfy the positive criteria. There are some applicants' attorneys that will tell you as a board that their application must be approved merely because their client falls into the inherently beneficial use category. But courts have recognized this is an erroneous position. The term inherently beneficial is often used by the applicant as a tool to distract the board from the negative effects of an approval. In this case, we feel it was used as a means to create confusion and instill fear to influence planning board members to approve the applicant's request or face a lawsuit. If you don't approve this, it may be worse. To quote one member, the lesser of all evils warnings were brought up during the discussions prior to the vote by both the borough's planner and the planning board attorney. The Supreme Court of New Jersey, in the case of Seeker versus Township of Wall Zoning Board of Adjustment, considered the standard of review to be applied to inherently beneficial uses and crafted what has become known as the Seeker balancing test. The court said that the board must consider the negative impact of any on surrounding property owners, even for inherently beneficial uses, and that a board can in fact deny an inherently beneficial use application when the negative impact outweighs the positive. In this day and age, to be cognizant of global warming and the impact it's having on communities everywhere, I see no benefit on the removal of over 300 to 400 trees in the area that used to be known as Little Mountains.
and consider this a major negative impact on the community. While stormwater issues appear to be addressed, trees as dense as old as these in the most trafficked area of town combat air, light, and noise pollution, as well as provide a home to wildlife and birds of all kinds for their sanctuary and migration paths. I realize not everyone is into nature or an animal lover, but they are all part of our ecosystem and quality of life in our town. This area has been zoned for residential use since the town was established. At what point does the town say no to zoning changes to accommodate what will be a commercial project that should have been built on currently commercially zoned land? 244 is the first residential home on West Old Tappan Road. A fear is that other developers too will look at Enclave, Central Avenue Townhomes, and Washington Old Tappan development and say we can easily get our project approved there too, and cite statutes that can't be denied. With the proximity to the schools, the increase in traffic, residents, and shoppers that are coming, this is all a negative impact to the surrounding neighborhood. Finally, as we've learned, I don't think if anyone knew that Jarrett Herring House was historic and on the federal and state registry, or that American history was made here and fought here, which thankfully resulted in our nation being formed. The public has also learned the most recent 2016 master plan calls specifically for this particular plot of land to be preserved due to its historical importance and its environmental value. We don't know why it wasn't purchased by the borough when the opportunity arose. As stated, there aren't many locations in the center of our community designated for the inherent benefit of the residents of the borough. One of the bases of appeal is that adhering to the master plan's recommendation for this property, preserving the historic house, preserving watershed area and nature, saving over 200 to 400 trees, and creating a large heat island of impervious coverage meets the criteria of what is in the best interest of Old Tappan, its residents, and in fact the more significant inherent beneficial use for this piece of property. Mr. Gambuti and I have filed this appeal with the support of over 2,000 to date via petition online, to ask you to overturn the planning board's decision to approve this application. I'd like to thank you for your time, your consideration, and your continued vision to maintain and improve the quality of life and the character of Old Tappan. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to present our appeal this evening. Let me start by saying this appeal has little or nothing to do with what the applicant did or did not do. This appeal is about the Planning Board of Old Tappan and errors, mistakes, and omissions that were made by them. We feel that they did not adhere to the preponderance of goals in the master plan about the environment and open space, nor did they pursue the Phase 1, Phase 2 environmental survey or the historical survey during the hearings or in the conditions. We are not lawyers, so you won't be hearing us mention case law, that we might mention one or two of the cases stated in the testimony. In response to something Ms. Price said, and she said it again earlier before, in her brief, we will not be introducing any new evidence because, as the rules of this hearing dictate, we are to talk about what is in the transcripts from the planning board hearings and any of the information provided in the exhibits. Though here again, we won't be going into too much of that because this appeal is about the actions, words, and vote under inappropriate influence or recommendations from the planning board lawyer and borough parent planner as we see it of the planning board. We will be reading sections from the actual transcripts to support our points, and at times we will extrapolate a little bit to support our points. If there's anything that is deemed as new evidence, Mr. Gibbon, please make us aware of that. Personally, I'm a storyteller by trade. Sherry and I would like to tell you the story of the missteps by the planning board in the way that we see it. So here we go. So we're going to basically break this down by each of our appeal points and then discuss that appeal point. So we're going to read for the benefit of the public what the actual appeal point itself was first, and then we'll get into discussing about it. Sure. During the hearings, this is number one, which is floor area ratio variance. During the hearings, one of the major concerns raised was the R40 zone rule that limits the floor area ratio to a maximum of 8,400 square feet. However, the developer plans to build a structure that will be 81,000 square feet, almost 10 times what is allowed by the statute. The developer did not demonstrate that its building is consistent with the character with the neighborhood and does not offend the purposes of the limitation. Not only did the applicant's planner not present this information, but in fact the applicant's planner agreed on record that the proposal was out of character with everything in the R40 zone. The applicant's planner also agreed that the purpose of the law is to limit the size of structures which CSH is not complying with. We believe a legal issue arises because since the application also needed a use variance, the board's decision attempted to roll the floor area ratio variance into the land use variance, even though it is a separate D variance. The 244 Old Tappan Road property is zoned for only residential use, and that issue is never considered alone on its merit. The two issues are independent of each other and should have been considered separately. So that was our first appeal point that we had sent in. And so here we go. During the initial hearing on February 9th, 2022, Mr. Chanel, the applicant's civil engineer, stated the floor area ratio variance request. Dan Chanel. The zone itself presents 8,400 square feet of minimum floor area, essentially for a dwelling. With this lot containing our 30,000 square foot footprint times 3 stories, we get up to just over 81,000 square feet versus the 8,400 that's permitted. Jumping ahead to the January 11th, 23 hearing, Dan Steinhagen is questioning Mr. Williams, confirmed that the RA40 zone requirements and how this use was out of character for the neighborhood. And during these, because some of these are a little bit long, Sherry and I might go back and forth on them, just so you know that.
Can I kind of do role play to save everybody some time?
Yeah, this way I don't have to hear my voice drone on forever. Question for Mr. Steinhagen. So, it's your opinion that the borough zoning ordinance permits an 81,000 square foot building in the R40 zone?
No,
Why not?
because that's not what the code requires.
Is there a floor area ratio limit in the R40 zone?
Yes,
Okay, do you exceed the floor area ratio limit in the R40 zone?
we do.
Do you need a D4 variance?
Okay,
Is that a fair statement?
that is.
Okay, are there any other buildings in the R40 zone that are in the range of 81,000 square feet?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it's not consistent with the neighborhood? There's no response at this point. Yes?
The FAR, or the floor area ratio variance, we'll call it the FAR, is not consistent. That's true.
Okay, do you know what the purpose of the FAR variance is?
Yes,
What is it?
it's to limit or control.
Wait, excuse me, let me back up. The purpose of the FAR restriction is not the FAR...
I understand.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the transcript is...
It's to control intensity of development.
And further on in this exchange, Dan Steinhagen again questions, okay, now with respect to density, do you know what the permissible density in the R40 zone is?
I'll have to double check my records.
Okay, so
That's part of my original testimony, but I'd have to,
would you agree with me that the R40 zone, because it says the minimum lot area is 40,000 square feet, it requires one dwelling on at least 40,000 square feet?
yes,
That's the minimum?
yes.
And are you aware that there's case law that says a municipality can regulate density, not just by saying in the bulk chart, the maximum, the minimum, the maximum density is 1 unit per acre, 3 units per acre. He corrects himself a lot. They do it by way of making a minimum lot area requirement.
I am aware. I forgot the name of the case, but yes.
Okay, well, a density, a permissible density, if I told you the permissible density based on a 40,000 square foot area, minimum lot area, 1.09 units per acre, would that sound about right?
Sure.
It's a little bit less than,
Yeah,
40,000 is a little bit less than 43,560.
right,
Correct.
right.
And how many units per acre are being proposed here?
So the DUs, or dwelling units per acre, were testified both to my direct testimony and the site engineer. The reason we're before this board is because we exceed that.
I understand. What's the number?
I have to look that up.
You're doing 100, and it's about 5.5 acres?
Correct.
So it's a little bit less than 20.
Yes.
Are there any zones anywhere in the borough of Otopan that permit a density of about 18 units an acre that you're aware of?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And are there any developments, whether permitted by zoning, pre-existing or otherwise, are there any projects, any conditions anywhere in the borough where there is, in fact, 18 dwellings units per acre?
Allowed? No. Permitted? Approved? That I don't know.
So you have no idea whether or not this, with 18 units an acre, and I get that it's a different type of use than a traditional single family,
Correct.
or even a multifamily, there's nothing in the borough that comes anywhere close to the density, is there?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and what's the purpose of a density restriction?
Also well, there are a couple of reasons, a couple of purposes. One is to control intensity of development, and the other is for impact on the surrounding community.
Okay, did you look at the 1994 master plan?
Again, I did, yes.
Okay, so you're familiar with the statement on page 76 that says the goal of the master plan is directed to maintain the low-density residential atmosphere in Old Tappan. You're aware of that, right?
I am.
Okay, and 18 units an acre in this community is not necessarily low density, is it?
No, it's not.
During the December 14th, 22 hearing, a resident brought up the case Sunrise Development Incorporated versus the Princeton Zoning Board of Adjustment. This is significant in that it mirrors this case and should have been reviewed by the board after it was brought to their attention. You'll learn more about this later in the presentation.
Appeal point 2 is unlawful quid pro quo. The borough, as a result of the appeal, will be receiving the Jarrett Herring House for free, as well as movement of the house across the street and a new foundation, all paid for by the applicant. This, as the CSH, Capital Senior Housing Planner, testified, is legally considered something of value. In essence, part of the basis for approval offered by the developer was that it was donating a valuable property to the borough. This is illegal, and the planning board violated the law by approving the application. The only way an applicant can convey something of value to the municipality is if it is authorized by statute and ordinance, and the donation of a historic structure in exchange for a use variance is authorized by neither. The legal benefit, for those that don't know, the legal definition of quid pro quo is the specific intent to give or receive a thing of value in exchange for some future action that the public official will take, and may already have determined to take, or for a past act that he has already taken. During the September 14th, 22nd hearing, Ms. Price addressed the gift of the Jarrett Herring House being given to the town. Ms. Price, I'm being her at the moment. I had advised the board of last month that we will be moving the historic home across the street as basically a gift to the borough at our client's cost, so situated in a location picked by the borough and putting down a foundation, also at our client's cost, to provide future housing for that structure. And Dan Steinhagen brought up a point that the planning board should have acted on because there are serious implications of this gift between the borough and the applicant. Those my words, that line. It's not anything. But there are definitely serious implications of this gift between the borough and the applicant. Now, Dan Steinhagen said, "We're now hearing about a gift to the municipality. I have really strong concerns about that." Then we move on to the December 14th, 22nd hearing. Mr. Tim Adrians, a recognized historical expert, confirmed the fact that the Jarrett Herring House has value. The following is the exchange between Mr. Steinhagen and Mr. Adrians.
Tim, we're aware that the applicant here has proposed not to demolish the structure, but instead, as part of its application, has indicated to the board that it intends to relocate it. Relocate the historic structure at the expense, on their expense, onto municipality-owned property and donate it to the borough?
Yes.
And is the donation of the structure a valuable thing that the municipality, that the borough of Old Tappan is going to be getting?
Yes.
That's all that I have.
Finally, from January 11th, 23, Mr. Steinhagen, in questioning Mr. Williams, received confirmation of the quid pro quo.
And I guess you're saying at the same time the borough is getting something valuable in exchange for what's going on,
That is correct.
for this variance.
This is Mr. Williams, who is the planner, answering. So that is correct.
For this variance.
That is correct.
And the approval? Okay.
Then in essence, this in essence proves that the quid pro quo is confirmed by the applicant's expert.
This will be our appeal point number 3. The approval, conflict of interest. The approval must be reversed because the approval must be reversed because it is infected by a conflict of interest. The borough administrator, although lawfully a member of the board, is not permitted to consider an application where her employer, in this case the borough, is receiving a valuable property in exchange for the approval. Once the applicant had offered to give the borough something of value in moving the Jarrett Herring House, as noted above, she should have recused herself. Her failure to do so, and instead cast what amounted to be the deciding vote, tainted the entire hearing and requires it to start over from scratch with an unconflicted board. As citizens of Old Tappan, we believe this raises a serious legal issue. Yet another reason for the mayor and council to reverse the planning board's approval of the 244 application. According to the New Jersey Local Government Ethics Law, municipal employees are expected to act in the best interests of the municipality and avoid any situation that could create a conflict of interest. It's under this law that the borough administrator of the borough of Old Tappan, an appointed planning board member, and appears to be in violation to vote on this application due to this conflict of interest. As per 40A 12-22.3 definitions, in Section G, a local government officer means any person, whether compensated or not, whether part-time or full-time, elected to any office of a local government agency, serving on a local government agency which has the authority to enact ordinances, approve development applications, or grant zoning requests. As per 40A...
Zoning variances.
Zoning variances. Apologize. As per 40A, 9-22.5, Section C, no local government officer or employee shall use or attempt to use his official position to secure an unwarranted privileges or advantages for himself or others. In this case, the municipality of Old Tappan is the employer, and as quoted and confirmed by Tim Andriance on 12/14/22, the historic pre-Revolutionary War Dutch sandstone house has value. Therefore, it has been determined that the Jarrett Herring House is an in-kind contribution to the borough, in exchange for approval on a variety of variances, including but not limited to the important land use rezoning. It's under this statute that the borough administrator should have recused herself. While members of the planning board may not have been aware of this law, the attorneys present should have recognized that now there is a conflict of interest and determined the appropriate action. We see this as an error that puts the approval in question. I'll do this one real quick. The number 4 was the borough engineer concerns, which we're not going to address tonight because there was an agreement that was made. So we're just going to skip over that because it's not relevant at this point.
But it's still in the appeal. Number 5, the number of affordable housing units is improper. The borough requires a 15% affordable housing set aside based upon its affordable housing settlement, but the project is only doing a 10% set aside and did not get a variance. If this application is approved in some form, we believe that the borough should at least get the amount of affordable housing units required by law. Otherwise, the borough runs the risk of not getting credit for any of the affordable housing units on the property. Being that COA credits are so important, we feel that the planning board should have further pressed the applicant for more COA credits because the borough ordinance requires a minimum of 15%. During the February 9th hearing, I'm not sure I'm saying his name right, Mamari
That's right.
asked Mr. McGilvey to add more COLA units, and he said no. Mr. Mamre.
I just whispered something with my board attorney, and I asked him if we were able to increase the amount of COLA units that they were going to be proposing for more than 10, and
Mr. Reagan said the maximum is 10.
the maximum is 10 that we could squeeze out of it, right? So I would like 20.
Mr. Reagan replied, that's the number that's required. Could he volunteer 20?
Mr. McKelvey answered, you know what, if I was an independent living community, yes, but there's so much care involved in this model that that would be impossible to do.
And that was the end of the discussion. The board should have pressed further and required the applicant to provide more COLA units. In response to the question by a resident, Mr. Sabo explains why the 10%. Mr. Sabo, if it's for sale, you were going to...
Okay. If it's for sale, 20%, whatever is being proposed, a condo or a townhouse or a development, that's for sale is 20%. If it's residential, 15%. This is treated differently under the law because it is an assisted living facility. It's 10% of the beds, and each bed actually qualifies as a unit towards our obligation.
Mr. Reagan replied, and there'll be Medicaid beds. Then Ms. King said, is there an obligation in COLA for Medicaid beds?
And that's the resident that was questioning this. Mr. Reagan then said, has an obligation in this type of development.
And Mr. Sabo said, it's 10% and we get credits for that. Later in the January 11th, 23rd hearing, Mr. Mamari asked about the 15% borough mandated set aside. The applicant said they were complying with the regulation because they are Medicaid units. But the town's regulation says rental. This assisted living facility is charging a monthly fee and therefore is a rental facility, which then triggers the borough's regulation. Vice Chairman Mamre.
I would be interested in knowing why Mr. Steinhagen was mentioning the 15 as opposed to the 10, because that's something that it wasn't made clear to us.
Mr. Reagan replied, well, the 10% is a Medicaid regulation.
Ms. Price then replied, Medicaid, right?
Mr. Reagan said, right.
Ms. Price, it's a Medicaid regulation.
Mr. Reagan said, what he's talking about in the borough's settlement with Fair Share Housing Center, any new developments have a 15% set aside. Any new developments of more than 5 units, there's a 15% set aside. If you have a rental, that's a boilerplate provision in every settlement with Fair Share Housing all across the state.
And Mr. Mamari said, is that applicable here?
Mr. Reagan replied, I don't believe it is.
Ms. Price replied, no.
Mr. Reagan said, because this is a Medicaid regulation.
Ms. Price replied, right, the Medicaid regulation that governs this type of development is for 10% set aside. That's why I wanted to be clear that we weren't violating any provision.
Vice Chairman Mamre responds, well, that was my point. I'm just getting some clarity.
Ms. Price then responded, right, that's why I wanted to make sure by my redirect that it's clear we're not asking for any relief and we're not violating any regulations. We're compliant with the regulations.
But they are not being compliant with municipal ordinance. Further discovery should have been pursued by the Planning Board regarding Medicaid versus municipal ordinances. That we feel is an important oversight. Then later still on the January 11th, 23rd hearing, during Dan Steinhagen's summation, he refutes the applicant's position on the 15%.
Mr. Steinhagen, I'm going to start with the question that was just posted about affordable housing. I represented a party in the borough's affordable housing declaratory judgment action. I'm going to check the citation if you don't mind. It's section 255-122 of the borough's zoning ordinance, which is entitled Affordable Housing Mandatory Set Aside. And it refers to any residential dwelling at a density of 6 units or more per acre, whether permitted by a zoning amendment, a use variance granted by the borough's planning board acting as a board of adjustment, or the adoption of a redevelopment plan. That's what it applies to. The fact that the Department of Health says, As a condition for your licensure for a certificate of need, you need to provide us, the DOH, with 10% of the beds for Medicaid. Has nothing to do with your affordable housing set-aside, mandatory set-aside ordinance. There's no exception. Because a party is agreeing with some other entity to do something, that they get it passed from your ordinance. Your ordinance does not allow a 10% set-aside.
Mr. Reagan, have you ever seen an assisted living or nursing home development with a set-aside of greater than 10%?
Mr. Steinhagen, yes.
Mr. Reagan replied, and where was that?
In the borough, in the township of Marwa, right now, my firm is representing a developer where a substantially higher than 10% set-aside is required.
And what was the Medicaid regulation applicable?
Mr. Steinhagen replies, the project is currently in the developmental process, but Fair Share Housing Center demanded a higher set-aside.
Mr. Reagan, okay, they haven't demanded anything in...
They haven't. They have not. I can't speak to what they've demanded. I can tell you that your ordinance says in any application for a residential building with more than 6 units per acre that requires a use variance, which is what we're here for tonight, we heard that this is 18 units an acre and it's a use variance, requires a minimum set-aside of 15%.
Then he continues.
I think that the applicant's position is wrong. I think that there is a chance that this project does not get affordable housing credit. They'll get credit for Medicaid units under their certificate of need, but you may not get any affordable housing credits, and Fair Share Housing Center may come after you.
Mr. Reagan responded, but you've had the opportunity to speak to Fair Share, I assume, about this issue.
Mr. Steinhagen, I've talked to them about this issue in connection with another project in Colster.
Not in connection with this project?
No, not in connection with this project, but a project in Colster that's currently in front of the Board of Adjustment, and they want, well, I can assure you that Mr. Bowers wants more than 10%.
Well, I've had other issues with Mr. Bowers on assisted living facilities where he accepted the 10%.
Mr. Steinhagen, okay, this is an inherently beneficial case use. The applicant, while it said it did demographic studies, did not demonstrate the extent of the need. And that's a problem for the board because on one hand, you have the special reasons that are assumed to be satisfied versus the negative impacts. We don't know how heavy that side of the scale is. We don't know how many beds there are in the community. When I say the community, I don't mean Altapan because there is another community. There is another...
Mr. Reagan, you're talking about regional surplus?
Correct. We don't know that.
Do you have any evidence of any?
Mr. Steinhagen, no, I don't have. Mr. Reagan, I'm sorry. I'm giving a summation. I don't have the burden.
I'm just asking you a question.
No.
If you don't want to answer the question.
No, I don't have the burden of demonstrating the extent of the need. That's the applicant's burden. The applicant hasn't done it.
We've heard time and again how vital the COA units are to the town. So we were asking the council to determine why the planning board settled for only 10 when they allowed the deviation from the borough ordinance. We consider this another instance of a planning board error.
Now we're up to number 6 of 8. Master plan issues. The borough's master plan and the re-examination reports as approved of by the planning board raise specific points regarding the property located at 244 Old Tappan Road and its associated Jarrett Housing House, Herring House structure. We believe in its resolution, the planning board did not properly address the recommendations in the most recent master plan with regard to the historic structure. The house should be left intact in its current location, and the applicant should be required to design its development around it. We believe that the planning board did not properly consider the master plan recommendation. That's our appeal point. The specific language of the 2016 master plan was discussed during several planning board meetings. There were many conflicts of opinions on the interpretation, or more important, on which benefit to the town has the greater value. If you ask OT residents, it's obvious they feel open space takes priority. If you ask the applicant, senior centered assisted living takes priority. We recognize this is a highly unusual case, especially when you have the task to evaluate whose interpretation should take precedence. Does the financial gain for this developer take precedence over the intention of the master plan regarding this particular piece of property? In the testimony regarding the need for assisted living housing and the silver tsunami, as Mr. McElway put it, there is not one reference to the fact that Old Tappan, with a population of under 6,000 and the median age of 37.5 years, already has an assisted living facility, Sunrise Assisted Living, as well as there are over a dozen plus within a 5-mile radius. We aren't suggesting that assisted living isn't essential. It's just not essential for a second one in our town on this site. Nor did the applicant prove that the need for more assisted living in Old Tappan or present numbers to justify their claims. They do have the certificate of need from the state, but the document specifically states the department in improving this application has relied solely on the facts and information presented. The department has not undertaken an independent investigation of such information. If the material facts have not been disclosed or have been misrepresented as part of this application, the department may take appropriate administrative regulatory action to rescind the approval or refer the matter to the Office of New Jersey Attorney General. Unquote. During the November 9th, 22 hearing, Mr. Williams was questioned by Peter Ardito. Peter is co-chairman of our downstream neighbor, Harrington Park, chairman of the Environmental Committee, and board member of Bergen Swan, which stands for Save the Watershed Alliance Network. As stated in the transcripts, Mr. Ardito has personal experience in planning board, due diligence, and approval decisions with irregular assisted living applications to do business in Harrington Park near their wetlands.
Mr. Ardito,
You go ahead.
you said you have walked the property, that's correct?
The witness, who is Mr. Williams, yes. Well, actually, I said I and my staff have visited the site, but yes, we have walked.
Okay, and you've also stated that you read the master plan, and as has been furnished by the planning board.
Correct.
The master plan goes on to say specifically about this piece of property, that if it was to become available, it should be preserved as is, especially because of its location in town. So when you speak of inherent benefits, and you say that you don't see any negative benefits to the development of this property, I would ask you, by reading the master plan that you have said you have, and reading those specifics, and it specifically states about 244, that would it not be equally beneficial for the community for this property to in fact adhere to the request in the master plan to keep it preserved and make it into a park in the central area of town? Also, preserving the historic house because of the value that is, because you said there was no inherent value at all. One might argue, I'm asking if you could argue that maybe that is an inherent value.
What's the inherent value?
Of keeping the property for public use and keeping the historic house where it is.
Mr. Williams' response, so just for the record, I did not say that there would be no inherent value to keep it the way it is.
Okay, I believe you did say there was no inherent value.
Mr. Williams replied, I definitely didn't say that.
I apologize.
But in terms of the master plan, so one option is obviously to leave it as it is. The application before this board, however, is to develop it for the purposes that I've described as an assisted living development, and the board has to review each application on their own merit, and they will base their decisions on the municipal land use law, on the preponderance of evidence as submitted by our team and or other experts, and they'll have to weigh and vote it up or down, right? In terms of the master plan, I provided page numbers in my testimony. I'm not sure where you read that in the master plan.
I have the information. I would be happy to furnish it to you.
I would just submit that when I look at the master plan, notwithstanding your point about the specific reference, which I did not see, by the way.
I can give you a page number and paragraph.
I can trust. I'm just saying I didn't catch it. But I look at the plan in its totality. That's why I shared the goals and objectives I did. During the same hearing, a resident of town questioned Mr. Williams on the proposed use of the property and which use takes precedence.
This is, Ms. Magaro spoke. I do have the wording from the master plan for you.
Mr. Williams, which one?
The one that references this property.
Which year?
2016. I don't have the page number. Since most of the borough's recreation lands are not centrally located, explore and pursue any opportunities that arise to obtain properties suitable for recreation near the borough's central zone. One example of a recent success story is the Oaks property on Central Avenue north of Herring Drive. One other such pursued property that has not yet, as yet been successful is the historic Jarrett Herring House property, adjacent to the west side of the Korean Presbyterian Church of the Palisades, which is a different church now on Old Tappan Road, west across from Russell Avenue, which this property. Excuse me. So as a planner, when you're discussing inherently beneficial uses, in this case, would be mutually exclusive. Your beneficial use of the assisted living is a generalized one and can be placed in other locations. This is a unique piece of land that is specifically named in the master plan. So as a planner, how would you prioritize a specifically named use of a specifically named property versus a generalized community beneficial use?
Mr. Williams replied, "It's an excellent question. This is perhaps a super particular instance because, in my opinion, they're not mutually exclusive. Why? Because you have a situation where the borough has identified an alternate site for that historic structure and an applicant who has agreed to, at significant expense, to relocate that historic structure, which was in a state of disrepair, to a site which may actually be more suitable given its access and visibility, etc., and the care of that property." So,
Ms. Magaro, they mention the historic house, but they're referring to this property as a recreational property, not as a museum. So once it becomes an assisted living, it will no longer be a recreational property. They are mutually exclusive.
Mr. Williams, I don't agree with that, but I hear what you're saying.
Ms. Magaro, well, how could it be a recreational property centrally located at this specific location if it becomes an assisted living?
Again, and I tried to address this in my earlier comment about the master plan. I still can't find the citation. I'm looking at the master plan, but you read it verbatim, so we'll go on face that that's what is in the 2016 master plan. But as a planner, I'm looking at the master plan in its totality, and that's why I read the goals and objectives that I read, and I would stand by my opinion that the application before this board is for the development for the purposes that it was stated and submitted, and that the trade-off or compromise in this case is the relocation of that structure. Yet it won't be used as recreational space, but I'm not sure it is now, which salvages the historic significance of that site or the structure and allows for a development on the site in a way that has been quite challenging but successfully done.
Ms. Magaro, no, I'm not asking about that historic building as a historic building. That's used as a reference point to dictate which piece of property is being discussed in the master plan. So I'm not asking about using that building as a historic building. I'm asking about using that acreage as recreational space in the center of town. That's what, and it doesn't say that it's being used as that. It's saying that it should be acquired if at all possible. So given a specific use of a specific piece of land versus a generalized beneficial use, how can one prioritize those?
Mr. Williams responds, again, if you look at the totality of the master plan and the number of goals and objectives and weigh them against the citation you're providing, my testimony will still be that the application before this board and its community is a good application. It does advance the goals and objectives of the master plan for all the reasons I've stated.
Okay, I disagree.
During the same hearing, Mr. Williams was questioned on his testimony by another resident of town.
Ms. Song, so how does the location of this development best support other goals referenced in the 2016 master plan, specifically Goal 8, which states that Old Tappan seeks to pursue opportunities to achieve a greater balance of non-residential to residential land use in appropriate locations and appropriate intensity? Excuse me. So my question is, how do you justify this lot as the most optimal space for this project?
Mr. Williams responded, I am trying to parse the questions. It sounds like there are a couple of questions, right? One is specific to Goal 8. The other is, how does the proposed development comport with the master plan? And there was a third, I think.
Just two.
Two, okay. As I review the master plan in support of this application, I look at, as I think I've mentioned before, the overall intent and purpose of the master plan and goals and objectives that may support this application. I listed several. It doesn't mean that this application will advance every goal and objective of the master plan. There's some that are just not applicable, but in my opinion, having reviewed the master plan, there are significant goals and objectives and policy statements that would be advanced if this application were to be approved.
So you're saying Goal 8 doesn't have to do with this?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that in terms of, and I should make sure which goal, do you know what page you're looking at for Goal 8? Here's some confusion as to this particular page, but an audience member came up with a specific page to reference.
Page 47.
47. Ultapan seeks to pursue opportunities to achieve greater balance of non-residential to residential land use in appropriate locations at appropriate intensities, but within existing commercial areas. Yeah, so I think I would go back to my original statement that while there are a number of goals and objectives in the master plan, I cited the goals and objectives that I think will be advanced by approval of this application. During the December 14th, 2022 hearing, Mary Walsh, who is chair of the Sierra Club chapter of Bergen County, brings up the fact that any changes to the plan need to be presented to Bergen County Planning Board under 40:27-4. I quote from Goal 2. The borough seeks the encouraged development that preserves Ultapan's sensitive environmental features, including floodway and flood plains, groundwater recharge areas, wetlands and their associated buffers, wellhead protection areas, steep slopes and environmental supporting, rare, threatened, and endangered species. And we do have threatened species there. I'm going to speed up to Goal 2 because I think I won't have time. Goal 6, to preserve the historic features of the borough. Policy statement. Ultapan recognizes its historic features continue to be an integral part of the community's unique character. Ultapan seeks to maintain and protect its historically significant structures and sites from adverse impacts created by development proposals, whether they be public or private. Goal 9, to discourage the creation of flag lots or subdivisions of property that create new or disruptive developmental patterns contrary and to the detriment of existing residential developmental patterns in the borough. You may be wondering why I'm reading this. Because according to New Jersey statutes annotated 40:27-4, in order to maximize the degree of coordination between municipal and county plans and official maps, the county planning board shall be notified in regard to the adoption or amendment of any municipal master plan, official map, or ordinance under the municipal planned unit development. A copy of any such proposal, map, or amendment shall be forwarded to the county planning board for review and report at least 20 days prior to the date of public hearing therein. So by approving this development, you are changing the master plan, so you must hold a public meeting, a public hearing, and submit the amended plan to the county at least 20 days before that hearing. We question why this is not a part of a resolution drawn up after the approval by the planning board. This is an omission that needs to be rectified. Peter Ardito, in a statement that was allowed after the applicant's case was finished, said the following.
Mr. Chairman and planning board members, I have been a member of the Harrington Park Planning Board for more than 10 years and vice chair for the last 4 years. I understand firsthand the complexity of the decision you have before you concerning this application, the 244 Old Japan Road. I have in the past worked with Ms. Price, and I have great respect for her, but I am here to explain to you why you should vote no on this application. The planning board needs to answer the overriding question: would this applicant's project be of inherent benefit to the community, more so than the following recommendations of your current master plan, which are: preserve open space in the central district, do not rezone residential to commercial, consider stormwater management concerns and steep slopes of over 15%, protect the habitat of threatened species, preserve the historic house. On every count, the answer is no. This application is not of inherent benefit for the town. When it comes to the historic house, your last 3 master plans specifically have said if the opportunity came about to save it and preserve it and make that into a park, you should do that.
He continues.
All New Jersey residents should have easy access to open space. Open space and parks are essential to quality of life in New Jersey. Open space preservation protects water resources, cultivates biodiversity, and fulfills the recreational needs of local residents. Preserving 244 simply follows the borough's master plan. The master plan reviewed and submitted to the mayor and council by you, the Planning Board of Old Tappan, in 3 consecutive master plans. 244 was specifically noted the preservation for the good of the town, its citizens, and the environment. If you approve this application, you are saying that your master plan is not meaningful and that its recommendations carry little weight.
In Sherry Faunamo's statement, she brought up an interesting point that was worthy of consideration by the board.
In fact, I'll speak for myself.
Go for it.
I do my voice better than he does. In fact, Old Tappan has the beneficial distinction having one of a few historic stone houses in New Jersey listed on the federal and state registry. The site is a unique combination of wetlands and history, environmentally important to our ecosystem and Old Tappan and American history. In fact, last week, Governor Murphy issued a mandate for $25 million investment to preserve Revolutionary War sites, not destroy them. This has to do with the quintessential that's coming up. Quincentennial, sorry. That doesn't align with the master plan, and it fails in its inherent claim of inherent beneficial use. The number one objection in all of this is the wrong project at the wrong location. It's the wrong project in the wrong location.
Lori Sharkey, head of Bergen Swan, who has been responsible for saving countless numbers of acres in watershed property in Bergen County municipalities, made it clear to the board that money is available to make an offer to the owner of the property to keep it from development.
I'm urging you to partner with Bergen County Open Space Trust Fund, with Green Acres, and with my organization, with Tenafly Nature Association, with the Sierra Club. There's money. We've had a 2009 settlement with the water company. It's earning interest ever since then. It's over $1 million. There are other entities that are willing to also supplement that, private people. You've heard the most passionate discussions tonight arguing in favor of keeping this place. It is a gem. It's gorgeous. It's just 5.5 acres, but it's so much more significant than that.
We're asking the council to determine why the planning board disregarded all of these important points about the master plan. We submit that certain members of the board erred in favor of the applicant because they were led to believe if they denied this application, they would have been sued by the applicant and feared losing in Superior Court. But more on that later.
So we only have 2 more appeals left, so thank you for your patience. Number 7 is transparency. At the start of the hearings, the applicant's representative offered to preserve a section of the 5.4-acre property, including the historic house and vernal pool, to be preserved. At a subsequent hearing, the chairman of the planning board made an initial comment on the record that the Old Tappan Mayor and Council had instructed him to inform the public that offer from the applicant was rejected. There is no proof that the mayor and council ever considered this proposal or relayed their negative decision to the chairman. At a later hearing, the planning board chairman admitted that what he had claimed was, in fact, not true. The false statement by the chairman and the applicant's withdrawal of the offer to leave the historic house intact and deed land to the town is a serious issue not yet explained. It raises potential legal questions that need to be addressed immediately. Until all the facts are known, again, we believe the planning board's approval should be vetoed. In the original design plans, Capital Senior Housing included the 2.1-acre subdivision to be sold for $1 to the town, to be used as a park, or how you saw fit, which was a significant part of the original application. Our appeal refers to the lack of disclosure by Chairman Buddy Weedman, without council approval or authority on why he rejected this offer. This was a surprise announcement to the board, to the public, and to Ms. Price. This statement significantly changed the path of the application and the impact on the land, the wetlands, the vernal pool, and the Jarrett Herring House. To this date, no reason or explanation on this statement has been made. During the February 9th, 2022 hearing, Dan Chanel, who's the
He's the civic engineer.
civic engineer,
Said. So I wanted to mention that we'll also have, for that proposed subdivided lot, we're relocating the historic house. We're also providing a small driveway and a parking area for the community to utilize if there is a use for that building. So that small driveway is only about 18 feet in width, adequate to get a car in and out. There will be 2 parking spaces, 1 accessible, so an ADA parking space and then a standard parking space. And then we'll provide a nice little sidewalk back to the entrance of the house. Again, just to provide a parking area and a use for that house.
we move on to the meeting from May 11th, 22. Mr. Weedman, I have one announcement before you start. The announcement is after speaking with the mayor and council from the Borough of Old Tappan. They are not interested. They are not interested in the house you want to move. So unless you can get, people who are interested in doing it, as far as the mayor and council is concerned, you can knock it down, the house and the barn.
Ms. Price responded, okay.
Chairman Weedman, okay, so I don't know how that sits with you, but that's the conclusion, the board also on this matter, madam. Then on June 8th, 22, prior to the start of the planning board meeting, Mr. Gallagher stated,
You want to do that? Councilman Gallagher, my other point from the council's standpoint is my understanding is the chairman, perhaps at the beginning of the application, will be making a comment about a comment that he made last meeting about the house, and the mayor and council have no interest in preserving the house or wetlands or anything else on the property. And all I can say is that from a mayor and council standpoint, there has been zero discussion regarding that piece of property, because it sits in front of a planning board tonight and probably for several months. So the mayor and council has had no discussions on any aspect of this application. So I just wanted to make clear, and the chairman might have something to say before the application starts tonight.
so the meeting begins with Mr. Weedman's next statement. Chairman Weedman, okay, just regarding this application, I had made a statement that the mayor and council were not interested in the old farmhouse on that property. I probably misspoke. I spoke to some people on the mayor and council, and if anyone from the public here or anyone from the town is interested in preserving that building, my recommendation is you attend the mayor and council meeting on either,
Ms. Fullick responded June 20th.
June 20th or July 18th, and speak with the mayor and council regarding it, okay? So that's still up in the air. I did go to the meeting on the 20th and spoke with the gentleman. The repercussions of Mr. Weedman's statement was to remove the subdivision variances, the offer of the 2.1 acres, the house being kept on its original property, and we also lost the offer of a driveway and parking spaces. Next, the meeting continued with Capital Senior Housing Site Civil Engineer stating those repercussions.
Good evening again, Chairman, members of the board. Again, Daniel Chanel with Dynamic Engineering, Site Civil Engineer on behalf of the applicant. So since the last hearing, we did make some adjustments to the plan. As we discussed at the last hearing, we are no longer proposing to essentially subdivide this property, and by moving the historic house for that piece of property and subdividing off the piece of the wetlands. So since the last meeting, we have since removed that subdivision. We are now proposing a single lot as it exists, and then we also decided to demolish the existing barn, which was determined to not be historic. But if you recall from our previous testimony, we planned on relocating the existing historic house. That existing historic house was fronting on Old Tappan Road, and it violated the setback requirement per the zoning of this zone. So since the last hearing, we've removed that subdivision. We've removed the barn, and as a result, we were able to take that home that we were proposed to relocate and save, but now we have pushed it back further off of Old Tappan Road to a compliant setback. That house will now be set back 55 feet, whereas the requirement is, so we remove that request of a variance, and then also by removing the subdivision, we also remove the need for a building coverage variance. And this is our last point.
At that time, I just want to add, there was discussion, it's not here in this document, this is just an aside note, there was discussion about the Capital Senior Housing, because they didn't have to subdivide the land anymore, was be making, it's in the transcripts, you can look it up, they were going to be making a significant they were going to be saving money. So there was some conversation about, well, maybe they could do something for the town.
And that was coming from one of the planning board members. This is number 8, our final point. Inherent benefit argument. The concept of inherent benefit was used repeatedly by the applicant as justification as why the 244 Old Tappan Road application should be approved, despite the need of numerous major variances, including allowing a commercial use structure to be constructed in a residential zone. Although the need for senior housing is important, the need for additional senior housing at this location does not meet the inherent benefit requirement. The borough of Old Tappan already has a commercial senior housing development less than half a mile from 244 Old Tappan Road. In addition, there is substantial availability of established and new senior housing units covering the full range of pricing within 2 to 5 miles of the 244 location. Among the local towns with current senior housing units are Northvale, Norwood, Harrington Park, Emerson, and Lunenvale. There was also a commercially zoned location in Old Tappan on Central Ave that was previously approved by the planning board for senior housing development, did not go forward. We know that since has been
Off the table.
off the table and sold to PSE&G. Considering the exceedingly diverse range of currently available senior housing and the availability of a much more suitable location for this project on Central Ave, there is no convincing inherent benefit to the borough in approving of this project. The removal of over 200 trees sitting on 3.5 acres in a residential zone, the extremely negative impact on the sensitive wetlands in vernal pool, and the likely destruction of a historic house dating back to the 1700s clearly make this proposed development not of inherent benefit to the borough, but rather extraordinarily detrimental to its residents, visitors, and ecosystem. Okay, no, it's okay, I got it. There's a lot to unpack in this last appeal point of ours. We understand that senior housing is looked upon as an inherently beneficial use. With that said, the question to the planning board was, is this an inherently beneficial use for this project on this piece of property? We feel they erred in their judgment on this point. As just stated in the recitation of our appeal point, there was a good amount of discussion over the hearings of inherent beneficial use, but we would like to focus here on the specific points on the last hearing with statements by Mr. Zabel and Mr. Regan and statements made by the planning board members before they voted. First, we'd like to mention the vernal pool, however. In her closing statement, Ms. Price said, "There's been a lot of concern from the public about wetlands and vernal habitat and how to protect that area. The area is going to rest with the borough. We won't have any rights to do anything with that acreage because it will be the borough's." DEP, in their letter of interpretation, said we were an intermediate value, so 50 feet as a buffer. And DEP did a site visit. It wasn't just based upon an application that was mailed in. They came out to the site and did a walkthrough, and they said, yes, in fact, that there is a vernal habitat. But the only time that was relevant would be if we were applying for any permits, which we're not. During questioning of Mr. Chenal, the applicant's civil engineer, I brought about the DEP setback requirements for a vernal habitat. So these type of wetlands provide essential habitat for certain species of wildlife that can barely breed, that can breed only in these wetlands. According to the DEP's website, the species are also required in adjacent area of vegetated uplands between 500 and 1,000 feet to successfully complete their life cycles. Given that the property provides the majority of this type of critical habitat adjacent to the wetlands, how does the development propose to maintain the integrity of the ecological system? Mr. Chanel.
The witness, will be Mr. Chanel. By completely staying outside of the wetlands transition area outlined in the letter of interpretation provided by the DEP, who is the lead agency over the wetlands of this application.
So, but it's not, there's not 500 to 1,000 feet for these creatures that require that kind of vegetation and property to be able to complete their life cycles.
We're complying with what is required by the DEP, who is the lead agency for this application.
And is that as a vernal pool or just a wetland? Because they are different.
Under the letter of interpretation, which is a legal document prepared by the DEP, regarding this application, we are staying completely outside of that transition area, and they have certified is what is required for that value of the wetland. We're complying with it and not disturbing it.
Okay, so, but then there's nothing that's going to deal with the integrity of the system for the animals that would habitat in that vernal pool.
That's what the transition area is for.
And that's 500 to 1,000 feet?
50.
The letter of interpretation says there is a 50-foot buffer requirement, but it also states that it is a vernal habitat. So there's a dichotomy here that could have been followed up by the board, but instead a board member went on to talk about property elevation. Why did they not ask for this clarification on this matter from the DEP instead of, in our opinion, just going along with the applicant? Why weren't they questioned here about why they were not going for any permits considering it is a vernal habitat? Moving on to the general hearing house. During the February 9th, 22 hearing, Ms. Price stated there would be an historic expert giving testimony.
Ms. Price went on to say, so I'm going to ask you just to listen to all the experts, ask your questions. We have a civil engineer, an architect, a traffic engineer, a professional planner, landscape architect, a historic expert.
No historic expert ever testified for the applicant as to what they saw, did, or their opinion on whether the house would survive the move. While we certainly appreciate the offer to move the historic house made by the applicant, we also have shown in our quid pro quo appeal point that this seems to have been done to obtain the variance requests. During the same hearing, Mr. McKelvey brought up a historic survey.
Mr. Keel, David Keel, who's our chairman of our environmental committee, said, I'm more interested in the phase 1 than the geotech. I would like to see that.
Mr. McKelvey, in addition to the phase 1, there's probably a phase 2. It's a historic survey on the particular property as well.
Mr. Keel responds, whatever you got.
A historic survey is not part of the resolution conditions, though Mr. McKelvey stated that one would be done. This was also stated by Mr. Adrians, a historic expert presented by Mr. Steinhagen, who testified that it was imperative that a historic survey be done. Nor is there a Phase 1 environmental survey part of the resolution conditions, even though it was requested by Chairman of the Environmental Commission and Board Member, Mr. Keel. Why was neither of these part of the resolution conditions written up by the Planning Board attorney? We feel this is an obvious omission. During the August 10th, 22 hearing, Mr. Bedian, a Planning Board member, asked a question regarding the house. Mr. Bedian, I have a question about...
Ms. Price responded, oh, sure.
You know, I think we sidetracked with the drainage, which is important, about moving the property.
Moving the house?
The historic portion of the house, is that going to be engineered, the whole, like, the movement?
Oh, yeah, we'll have to, every square inch has to be.
Yeah, I've seen property, during the movement, they were damaged and, crumbled, all that.
It's not an expensive task to
Inexpensive.
It's not an inexpensive task to undertake, and we have 2 different historic consultants on board.
Mr. Bedian, okay.
And that would need coordination. As I said, probably with Tom Scrabble, the town engineer, the police department, and I don't know whoever else you need to get involved, but it would be an all hands on deck kind of.
Then Mr. Eller, another planning board member, chimes in, what do the consultants do in terms of documenting? And I mean documenting every aspect of the house. You know, God forbid something happens and the thing collapses, what's left after when you guys, if there's something after that, when you guys, if something like that were to happen and the house came down while you were moving it, it crumbled, what do you guys plan to do to document it to?
Ms. Price responds, I'm not sure I follow you. We have pictures of inside and outside.
Mr. Eller, okay.
Already. No one had a key, so our historic consultant climbed in one of the windows and took pictures. So we have a whole set of photographs at our disposal. So, but you know, I think what happens is that, like in any project, that if it doesn't stand up, it comes down. But we'll exercise what's required under proper professional guidelines.
In his closing statement before the vote, Mr. Bedian brought this up among other salient points. Mr. Bedian, I don't want to sound repetitive. Most of you know, my colleagues here, the board members covered, pretty much everything I had in mind to say. I'm still conflicted. I didn't buy the beneficial use argument that much. In my opinion, the historic house will not survive moving it from current location a couple of 100 feet to the parking lot here. I am a civil engineer registered in the state of New Jersey. I work for a construction company. One of my projects, I wasn't the project manager for that particular, contract, thank God, was an old firehouse in Peekskill, New York. You can Google it and you can see it, was to move the firehouse a couple 100 feet because it was in the way of building a highway. It did not survive. It was a 200-year-old house like the one we have here. It's very difficult to move very old buildings. Here we'd like to reference the municipal land use law. The structure is identified as a historic on the master plan. The municipal land use law allows for the preservation of historic structures that have been identified on the master plan as such to be the basis for imposing at the council level a hold on the approval and appeals, such as this, for up to a year. This gives the community the opportunity to make sure that this structure can be preserved in the move, and it cannot, then if it cannot, then the pretext for the planning board's approval no longer exists. And the matter must be remanded to the planning board for further review and vote with the historic piece removed. Mr. Bedian continues. I know the COA, that's the Council on Affordable Housing, for those that don't know, it's bearing on everybody's mind, but we're only getting 10 credits. It is something, it's better than 0, but it shouldn't be the major or the factor, vote on this application. Because this expert opinion about the house not surviving the move, there is an interesting point to consider here. Had Ms. Habanero recused herself, would Mr. Bedian have then been able to vote, and would he have potentially voted no to the approval of this application? Moving on to Mr. Zabel's closing statement, in warnings to the planning board members, first, there was an important point he made about procedure. You want to read that one for me?
So here's a procedure, and the importance of that is because if you don't follow proper procedures, if you don't follow the structure of the law in this kind of application, you run the risk of being overturned just on a procedural ground by disenfranchising someone. For example, or because you didn't follow some regulatory requirements.
We are not lawyers, obviously.
We are not.
But we certainly feel the public was disenfranchised. During the December 14th, 22 meeting, there was a back and forth between Mr. Eller and Ms. Price. It had to do with the fact that the board thought that there was going to be a chance for the public to ask questions of the applicant's experts, but that offer was denied by Ms. Price. We've since learned it is not the practice in other towns in New Jersey. In fact, the public was constrained many times to 1 or 2 questions instead of fully being able to get our questions heard. The public was only allowed to make 5-minute statements, none of which were in favor. But the point here is that we never got a chance to ask the applicant's experts questions that were denied during the hearings because they were not part of that day's testimony. And some of these people were not here on those particular days of testimony, and they did have questions for these experts that we would have liked to have seen the board allow. Then his point of regulatory requirement. Again, not a lawyer, but would Ms. Haviland's choice not to recuse herself fall under that? Mr. Szabo continues. I think the bottom line for me, in my experience with these, and I've seen many applications like that, is that it's very difficult. And it's not just assisted living, but any inherently beneficial use. It's very difficult to deny these things under circumstances where a lot of issues are being addressed. I have a recent case just a couple of weeks ago in another jurisdiction I represent, where the Board of Adjustment denied a use variance for this use. And the judge took 2 minutes to overturn the decision, remanded it back to the board for conditions only, and specifically told the board you cannot touch the density. So I'm not saying it's impossible. There could be issues that are raised, but you have to satisfy the negative criteria. That's the one thing you can hang your hat on. And that's where the board needs to reconcile everything that they've heard against the negative criteria, and can you balance that against reasonable conditions. But I will tell you that it's a tough row to hoe in front of a court. And if you're going to deny, you're going to need very, very clear specific reasons, and you hope they hold up. We submit that the negative criteria of the very likely destruction of the historic home, the damage to the historic value of the property itself, the damage to the vernal habitat, the loss of open space in the center of town, and the size and density of the building are all substantial negative criteria that could possibly satisfy the SICA test. Other boards have recognized substantial detriments in these types of applications. I brought up a case in Princeton where the decision to deny an almost identical application was upheld by that county superior court. In Sunrise Development, Inc. versus the Princeton Zoning Board of Adjustment, the board argued that the facility would greatly exceed the permitted density and floor area ratio of the zone. Consequently, the board found that the property cannot accommodate the mass and scale of the proposed building. The board also found that there would be a negative impact on the existing landscape, and particularly on the existing mature trees on the property. In that case, Sunrise proposed to build a 3-story building consisting of over 82,000 square feet and 89 units holding 100 beds on a 4.5-acre lot. Sound familiar? That board denied the application based on this and several other factors, and in the mentioned lawsuit, the board won. Then the issue of the next round of affordable housing requirement was brought up, and Mr. Szabo and Mr. Reagan speculated about what would happen.
Mr. Reagan, my concern, as you expressed, July 1st, 2025 is just right around the corner. Any vacant land within the borough will be looked at, in my opinion, by Fair Share Housing Center. The borough had an unmet need of approximately 240 units under its approved plan with the court and Fair Share Housing Center. I believe 40 of those units have satisfied out of Pearson, which would leave an unmet need of about 200, somewhere in that area. But it may be a little bit less because there may be some bonus credits at Pearson. But at least it's in the 180 range for an unmet need. What exposure would the municipality have on July 1st, 2025 if this land is vacant?
And just for the people that don't know in the audience, July 1st, 2025 is when the next round of COA requirements come through, start to happen.
And just to say, COA has to do with because of the way the laws are, especially in New Jersey, there's a certain amount of low-income housing that's really forced on the towns. You know, not necessarily the towns want them, these are just the laws we have to follow.
And so it puts these guys in a really difficult position. Mr. Szabo, it will be twofold. One, I don't know what the regulations in the future will be, but...
Mr. Reagan, no one knows, right?
No one does. I mean, if we go on the track based on past history for the third round, what would happen is that the unmet need, and I fear this, but it's coming, will become prior round obligations.
Mr. Reagan, that's an add-on.
It's an add-on.
Add it on to the fourth round.
Mr. Szabo, that's what happened in the third round.
Right.
Mr. Szabo. And then I think because the community has sewer capacity and there's a sewer available, you're looking at densities of maybe in excess of 12. Probably now Fair Share is looking at 15 to 20.
You're talking about exposure of maybe 60 and 90 units?
Mr. Zabel, possibly. I mean, it's speculative, Mr. Reagan.
I know.
Speculation about the future needs is certainly within the purview to present, but the planning board is tasked with looking at this application for this property at this time. In a court of law, as these hearings were supposed to be run, the judge would say, disregard that statement. It is possible that speculation influenced the vote of some members. Mr. Eller speculated himself about what would happen.
Do either you, he is referencing Mr. Reagan here, or John, do you know, Mr. Sabo, do you have any examples to demonstrate what the substantial reasons for a denial would be? Like have you ever, can you give us any examples that have been upheld and recognized and affirmed by the court and affirmed the board's decision?
Mr. Zabel, no, they're generally overturned.
Now Mr. Reagan speaks and says, I can't either, because when it's inherently beneficial use, you're in a different atmosphere, a totally different situation.
Mr. Eller, thank you. A brief aside here. Earlier, Mr. Weedman asked if any cases had ever been won. They mentioned the case in Franklin Lakes. Why did they not offer the substantial reasons here that the decision to deny a similar application was upheld? Mr. Eller continues.
I think that this is at least a bunch of this is the least evil of a bunch of bad decisions or a bunch of bad outcomes. I don't think anyone here wants to see this developed. But by the same token, I don't think there's any other, even remotely better situation or better outcome that can happen because of the COA situation and how this is going to go.
Then he later continues that thought.
I just don't think that there is any realistic better option for this, and it's truly unfortunate, and the problem is it's a political problem. It is not something that we have really any control over.
They are the planning board, and they do have control over this application for this piece of property. We feel all the reasons we have stated and the transcript sections we have presented show that the board made some questionable decisions, acted improperly and perhaps against the law in others, and in the end, that speculation about what could happen sway at least a couple of the votes in the direction of approval. All that was needed was one more vote to deny. That did not come to be, and our presentation tonight hopefully shows that the outcome should have been different. This approval is imperfect, and furthermore, the planning board is putting it in the hands of a developer. For example, the Jarrett Herring House has not been confirmed that it will survive a move. That was the basis for both the master plan analysis and the planning board action to preserve the structure. In the absence of that, and in other reasons we've stated, the decision by the planning board was imperfect. This is the council's opportunity on appeal for the board to deal with it. If after everything we've said doesn't convince you, then we want to remind you, you can improve the project, but subject to the condition it preserves the historic structure to the extent it can be preserved in a move. But insert a condition where a third party with expertise can evaluate that it will survive, or recommend what steps can be taken to preserve it. And it's not the developer that should be making that decision. We respectfully request that the mayor and council seriously consider our overall appeal and vote to overturn the planning board's decision. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, on behalf of the applicant, Ms. Price.
Good. If it's okay, I'll sit as well. Is that all right?
That's fine.
Okay. Again, for purposes of the record, Gail Price from the firm of Price, Neve, Shulman, and Darminio, on behalf of Capital Senior Housing, the applicant before the Ultapan Planning Board. Thank you for your attention in connection with this matter. I filed a legal memorandum last Wednesday, so you should have that in connection with the appeals that were filed. You also will note for the record that Lakeview, although they had filed an appeal, that appeal was withdrawn. So the only appeal that is pending before you is that of Ms. Spanero and Mr. Gambuti. I'd like to take, I know Mr. Reagan will take certain arguments on behalf of the board, but I'd like to address some of the issues that the appellants raised as they relate to our client and our experience over the year plus before the board. And I want to say that our client was incredibly respectful of the residents, and contrary to what you heard earlier, we brought back experts for multiple meetings, and the board allowed questions to happen. There was a 10:30 ending of the meetings, which we had no control of, but and we had no control on the amount of time, naturally, for speaking, but we brought back our experts on repeated occasion for questioning, and I'm sure that you saw from the transcripts when you reviewed them that the plan changed multiple times over the course of the time before the board, and that was as a result of issues that the board heard from the public, that the board heard from their professionals, and requests that were also made by people from Lakeview. So we've changed our drainage plan. We had at one point the home on our property. At another point, we had the house off of our property. At one point, we had a subdivision proposed. Critically, the environmentally sensitive property. Let me start with this. This is private property. It's not public land. It's 5.5 acres of private property. And I understand everyone says that this is a very key piece of property in Ultapan that they want to have preserved. It's someone's property that they have the right to develop. Our client happens to have a contract. Please. They have a right to develop it. Whether they get the approvals to develop it is a different statement. But they have a right, just as everyone else in this room has a right for his or her property. It's not property owned by the borough. It's not property owned by the county. So when you hear about what the citizens and the residents of Ultapan are entitled to observe on the property and continue to observe into the future, we're not talking about that kind of a case here. But the 2+ acres of land never were envisioned or proposed to be utilized for anything other than to remain environmentally sensitive and constrained. We have our letter from DEP with the wetlands configuration, the 50-foot buffer. We went 10 feet beyond the 50-foot buffer. We enlarged the buffer to make sure that we weren't just relying upon that 50-foot. So that, whether it was a dedication to the borough or a conservation easement to the borough, we're not going to use that property. So the construction and utilization is, aside from that constrained property. So the concerns about the wetlands, the DEP ruled, and we have a valid permit on that. Also important, this is not, we're not talking about single-family homes here in terms of density or size. An assisted living development is configured by beds. You don't have, full apartments, 100 beds, 83 actually for this one. So it's not like having density of 100 families on this piece of property, which is critical because a lot of the code sections are done for single-family properties. Specifically, that leads me into FAR. And I want just to take note of Table B in your code. Excuse me. In the R40 zone, for properties that exceed 80,000 square feet, there is no FAR requirement. Our property is over 237 square feet. What there is a floor area requirement, which at best is a C variance, not a D variance, not an additional D. So I'd ask you to take a look at that Table B in your zoning code, where it specifically says for R40 zone, properties over 80,000 square feet in size, floor area ratio, NA. So we did not need an additional D variance. Our D was based upon the assisted living, which is an inherently beneficial use by law in the state of New Jersey. And critically, it is not an inherently beneficial use, as the appellants suggest, that is defined by location. It is an inherently beneficial use by the use itself. Whether it's a hospital or a school or assisted living, it's the use that makes it inherently beneficial. Then you go to the 4 steps of the CEQA test, which I'll touch upon briefly, but I'm sure that Mr. Reagan will get into it because he detailed everything in the resolution. But it doesn't, the location of a particular project doesn't make it inherently beneficial or not. And I think that's very important because I think that there's a misunderstanding on that element. So our use of an assisted living is clearly defined for decades as inherently beneficial. So we were proposing, we had Department of Health sign off and approval for 183 beds and 10 affordable units. And those are Medicaid, which is what you heard a lot of, going back and forth. That's a federal issue. And the critical component there is, again, which is where I started off, you're not talking about a home, a rental home or a sale of a house. You're talking about a bed, which is why it's configured as a credit and not pursuant to the standard definition. And Fair Share Housing readily accepts it throughout New Jersey. The reference to the MAWA project, more than 50% of the MAWA project is independent living with your standard homes. So that's why the affordable housing numbers are higher. They're not limited to the 10%, because then it's either a 15% on a rental or 20% on a sale, because you have a full-blown house. And that's what the calculation is. You don't just have a bed calculation. So I hope I separated that out. There certainly was no quid pro quo here. We talked about the house. The property owner could and can still take action on the house. Before we started on the application before the zoning board, the property owner could have just demolished that house. A lot of people would have been very, very upset. And we recognize that. And we've made every effort to ensure that that doesn't happen. And the mechanism for ensuring that it doesn't happen when the appeal process is concluded is via a developer's agreement, which is the standard contractual provision that governs construction of a project after approvals, and bonding that's put into place to ensure the financial components are covered. And all of those elements that we refer to in the citations to the transcript are in fact honored in connection with whatever borough representative needs to be in place. Absolutely, the borough engineer would be a representative. But there was no quid pro quo. We talked about the house and said, we'll move it. You tell us where you want it. But it wasn't, there's a case, Nunziato versus Edgewater Township, where there was an illegal exaction, and the court said, no, you can't say, give me this and I'll give you a variance. That's not what this was. And that's clear from all of those transcripts that you read. This was painstakingly reviewed process before your board with all of my experts. And there wasn't other evidence put in, with the exception of Dan Steinhagen, called a drainage engineer, who only testified on one other occasion and got the file. I don't remember if he got the file the day before or the day of the hearing, and he hadn't had an opportunity to do any analysis. So he was never called back again. So there was a lot of fact testimony put in, but not expert testimony to contradict the testimony from our civil engineer, our traffic engineer, our architect, our licensed landscape architect, and our planner. Solid case, all professionals, unrefuted expert testimony that your board then voted on in accordance with the statute and adopted a 77-page resolution. Not a 7-page resolution, 77 pages. The next one was the claim for conflict of interest by your borough administrator, because there would be something of value to the borough. Isn't every application potentially something of value to the borough? Shouldn't there be? It's pretty hard-pressed if you say things are negative to the borough, because then certainly you shouldn't have anything approved. And there was no quid pro quo, as I said. And no one raised any claim that your borough administrator should not have been participating at any time during the proceedings. This is an argument that is just being raised at this point in time, and it has no merit. Similar to sheer speculation, not supported by the record, on how a deciding vote may have gone. You can't speculate on that. As you know, and we spent some time before we started tonight on objections, it has to be in the record. You can't speculate. A court of law couldn't speculate. We talked about the affordable units. Next is the master plan. It's very curious that the appellants point you to certain sections of the master plan, but leave out certain other sections. Specifically, they leave out goal 3, which talks about the need to encourage age-restricted housing with varying levels of care. That's on page 14 and 15 of your master plan, and our planner talked about that. They left out goal 4 on page 46, which talks about the need to provide a variety of housing types and densities to ensure a balanced housing supply. Old Japan recognizes the particular housing needs of its citizens with special needs. This goal should be interpreted broadly to specifically include encouraging the delivery of special needs affordable housing within the borough. We have a memory care component in the project. Goal 5 on page 46 says, create opportunities to encourage the creation of both market rate and affordable senior housing. The policy statement associated with Goal 5 is particularly important. It states, the baby boom generation continues to age. Old Japan has witnessed an aging of its population. There is a general lack of housing designed to service the unique housing needs of older residents. While senior housing has been developed in the borough to meet this need, Old Japan should continue to encourage developers or the public sector to provide such housing, especially to meet the needs of older Old Japan residents who seek housing designed specifically for their needs. None of that was referenced by the appellants, and all of which was very relevant to the board's findings and the adoption of its resolution. I talked about the preservation of the property and the inherently beneficial use. The artist site is on Central Avenue, as was referred to, as no longer in play, so that should not be considered. With the SECA test, an inherently beneficial use is automatically considered to have the positive criteria satisfied. And then there's 3 other steps to determine whether a variance should be granted. I only want to talk about one of them, which is the imposition of reasonable conditions, because that's where Mr. McElwee and our client, CSH, never said no to every request made by your planning board. And whether it was for proposed private contract with the ambulance service, so your EMS would not be overburdened. Yes, right away. They agreed to do significant work on Old Japan Road to specifically repitch the crown, which will alleviate a flooding concern and an ongoing problem for a resident at the end of Holbrook, and to widen a portion of Old Tappan Road as you come from in front of the church, neither of which is required by the application. But CSH agreed to address both of those issues in conjunction with this application and as part of its county planning board application. It agreed to a specific type generator that the fire department requested. It made significant plan changes and other requests for equipment on site that the fire department asked for. It agreed to modify its traditional shifts for employees, so there would not be any negative impact with the school and the start time for school and the end time with its employees. Same thing with regard to construction time, that the construction workers would not in any way be involved with the beginning of school or dismissal. In accordance with the provision that I read you from your master plan with specific older senior citizens here in Old Tappan, it agreed to provide a discounted rate to senior citizens here in Old Tappan. And that's a specific condition. And it agreed to a variety of noise related issues. And largely, it agreed, we had our engineer go down and meet with Bergen County Soil Conservation District, which you, I'm sure, are aware of when you have a project that requires a certain amount of soil to be moved. You need Bergen County Soil Conservation District approval. And there are typically certain things that you need to do to ensure compliance with the project. But we asked, in light of the concerns about the tree removal and construction, what could we do to go above and beyond the normal requirements? And they gave us a list of things that we could do. And we said, okay, fine. And I had our civil engineer put that on the record at one of the hearings and stipulated that we would take care of that as a condition. And we agreed to put in the wiring for future additional EV parking spaces, which you know is a requirement now, adopted by the legislature. But we went above and beyond our required numbers and agreed to do conduit for future spaces. And our landscaping plan, that we would meet with not only the planner, but with the Environmental Commission to revise. And that also we agreed there was a request to make sure that the elevator be able to accommodate a certain number of people on a certain size of stretcher. And there are more conditions, but I just wanted you to, understand that this is not a client or a project that took this site, whether it was from an environmental perspective or an operational perspective or an interaction with your borough and borough residents, in any way in a flippant or disrespectful or financially oriented only way. That's not what happened here. So I ask you on behalf of CSH to affirm what your planning board spent attend hearings on. And what they then adopted as a very detailed findings of fact and conclusions of law in their 77-page resolution, and allow our client to proceed with what I'm going to tell you, having worked with CSH on other projects, will make you very proud to have them as a resident here in town. Thank you.
Mr. Ray.
Good evening again, Mayor and members of the council. I promise not to be too long, particularly since we're talking about a 77-page resolution, which is certainly long enough. The board really wrestled with this application over a period of about a year. I think it was 9 or 10 public hearings. They really diligently reviewed every aspect, every component of the application. Their conclusions are in the resolution beginning at page 59, and there are a total of 36 conditions, several of which Ms. Price alluded to, which begin on page 68. But the board really focused first and foremost on the D1 use variance. And I can tell you, I've represented planning boards. I think I've been the board attorney here since around 2000. But I represented planning boards continuously since 1985. Sometimes you have an idea as to how an application will go during the course of the public hearing. And I can honestly tell you, I had no idea what the decision would be until the actual vote took place. I mean that sincerely. As you're aware, the property is in an RA40 district. A nursing home or assisted living facility, as you know, is not a permitted use in that zone. Consequently, a D1 use variance was required. And that's what the board focused on first and foremost, although they considered every variance as outlined in the resolution. Both the applicant's planner and borough planner John Zabo agreed that the proposed use constitutes an inherently beneficial use, which alone satisfies the positive criteria for the granting of a use variance. As you know, for variance, there's the positive criteria, then you have to deal with the negative criteria after you deal with the positive criteria. Not a single objector disputed the applicability of the inherently beneficial character of the proposed use. But this application went beyond that. Even aside from the inherently beneficial nature, other provisions of your 2016 master plan reexamination support a finding of satisfaction of the positive criteria. I would refer you to Goal 4, which talks about the borough recognizing the particular housing needs of its citizens with special needs, obviously senior citizens and people with Alzheimer's or special needs individuals that need housing. Goal 5, the creating opportunities to encourage the creation of both market rate and affordable senior housing. And lastly, Goal 6, to preserve the historic features of the borough, the historic structure which will be preserved. And by the way, the only thing standing between the demolition of that home is approval that was done by the planning board. That's it. Ms. Price, and no one has disputed the fact that that house could have been demolished at any time. It cannot be demolished now because of the action of the planning board. If that's a concern, the planning board acted appropriately and considered Goal 6 of the reexamination. Now, in addition to the positive criteria, an applicant must also show satisfaction of the negative criteria, that the variance, we're talking about the use variance first, may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantially impairing the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance. And the case of Seeker versus Board of Adjustment of Wall Township, in 1992 state Supreme Court decision has been discussed by both the appellant and Ms. Price. There's a 4-pronged test under the Seeker decision. First, we have to identify what is the public interest at stake. Now, substantial testimony was provided related to what that public interest is. The public interest of the housing needs of senior citizens. It was noted during the hearing that the fastest growing segment of the population is persons over the age of 85. And you know what the second fastest is? Persons over the age of 75. The fastest growing segment of the population. There's also significant testimony about the demographics and the number of cases of persons with Alzheimer's disease. Obviously, one of the worst diseases a person could encounter in their lifetime. That's the substantial testimony identifying the public interest. Okay? The proposed nursing home will advance these public interest concerns also with the providing of Medicaid beds and development, which will constitute an affordable housing credit. It's a federal regulation. You can't ask for more than 10%. That's my understanding, and no one has shown me any federal regulation that could allow you to ask for something more than 10%. The second prong of the secret test is the board has to consider the detrimental effect of the granting of the D1 use variance. The uncontradicted testimony demonstrated that the nursing home will generate less traffic than a permitted single-family development or a child care center. There was no contradiction of that traffic testimony. The third prong is to consider any detrimental effect and impose reasonable conditions, which the board did. As I alluded to earlier, a total of 36 conditions in the memorializing resolution. The first and foremost, the biggest concern that the board had in terms of public services was ambulance service. Condition number 1 on page 68, the very first condition in the resolution, requires that the applicant provide a contract for private ambulance service. Absent that contract being provided, no permit will be issued for the construction of this facility. There are also other conditions addressing possible or to mitigate any possible negative impact. Shift changes are required to not interfere with beginning and ending times at local schools. There is also a requirement for the preservation of historic structure on the property. That's condition 12 at page 71. And the board also required a bond. I know there's been concerns raised this evening that the house may become damaged during the moving process. A bond will be required, and the borough engineer will determine what that bond amount will be. There is also a requirement for tree replacement. There's substantial provisions in the resolution and the conditions about restoring the number of trees and contributing to the borough's tree replacement fund as required by ordinance. The board didn't make up this, it's required by your own ordinance. After reviewing all of these circumstances and analysis under the secret test, the board on balance determined that the granting of the D1 use variance will cause no substantial detriment to the public good. The board also looked at the FAR variance. I just want to give you some examples of this particular property. In analysis of a FAR variance, you have to show that the site can accommodate any problems as a result of the increased floor area ratio. In connection with the FAR, this site is 5.46 acres. The zoning requirement is 40,000 square feet. The site has a width of 495 feet. The ordinance only requires 150. The site's depth is 265 feet, 465 feet. The requirement for lot depth is 200 feet. The front yard setback requirement is 50 feet. The proposed front yard setback is 74.5 feet. The rear yard requirement is 50 feet. This site has a rear yard under the proposal of 175 feet. The combined side yard only has to be 50 feet. The combined side yard here is 290 feet, obviously providing a lot of buffer between adjoining properties. And the minimum side yard requirement is 20 feet. This development provides a minimum side yard 3 times greater, or 66.7 feet. The board also looked at the additional variance relief, and it should be noted that not only are goals and objectives of the 2016 master plan reexamination met, but numerous goals of the municipal land use law, such as general welfare, a housing development for special needs and senior citizens is considered to promote the general welfare. It will provide sufficient space for a variety of uses, a senior type and assisted living development. It preserves the historic structure, and it also provides for senior housing construction. Those are all purposes of the MLUO. Now, the appellants allege illegal conduct in the form of a quid pro quo and a conflict of interest. I submit to you that those allegations are not without merit, well, they're totally without merit. The approval results in the preservation of the historic home to be relocated on the borough property. This is consistent with Goal 6 of the 2016 reexamination, which references the preservation of the historic features of the borough. The policy statement notes that the borough's historic features are an integral part of the community's unique character, and that the borough seeks to maintain and protect its historic significant structures and sites. That was done here by the board approval. The board did not approve this application with the condition that that structure be moved consistent with what was discussed during the hearing, with a bond to ensure to the extent possible that the structure will remain in its current condition. That, absent that, the structure it's undisputed, the structure could have been removed, even before the application was filed. But it can't be removed today because of this approval. Absent approval of this application, that structure could in fact be demolished. I think there was no basis for the unfortunate and unfounded allegation relating to the borough administrator. I think it's sad that that allegation was made against someone I admire and consider a very effective administrator, an effective planning board member, and a really good person. Neither she nor the borough incurred any financial benefit by the preservation of this historic structure. All the board did, and all that Mrs. Havarilla did in voting to approve this application, was to ensure the preservation of the historic home to promote the goal 6 of the master plan. That's all it was. There's no financial benefit to anybody. There's a benefit to the borough to meet the goal 6 of the 2016 master plan reexamination. Now I'm going to bring up an issue that the appellants raised, and it's probably the elephant in the room, but I've been dealing with affordable housing litigation since the 1980s. And you saw the reference in the transcript, I believe it was the January 11th transcript, the colloquy between myself and Mr. Zabo about the borough's unmet need in terms of affordable housing. The settlement agreement you had with Fair Share Housing Center in 2017 provided that your unmet need was 240 units. Seems like a lot of units, okay, but I represent towns where it's double that, okay? There was a reduction in the unmet need as a result of the Pearson development. There's 40 affordable units on Pearson. So it brings the unmet need to somewhere around 200, maybe a little lower, because I think there may be some bonus credits toward the 40 units at Pearson. But at least it's in the 175 or 180 number, okay? This site, if it's vacant on July 1, 2025, will be a target of Fair Share Housing Center. I've dealt with them hundreds of times. They're insatiable when it comes to affordable housing. It's never enough. No matter what you do, it will not be enough, okay? So I think the colloquy that Mr. Zabel and I had on January 11th, beginning on page 89 and continuing on page 93, is very appropriate. It's part of the record. In my opinion, if the site is undeveloped in 2025, there is a real possibility, as Mr. Zabel indicated, that there will be a density. If you're lucky, it'll be 12 units per acre. It'll be 15 to 20 more likely. And it could well result in 16.5 or 100 units of housing on that site. Which is a more intensive development? 65 to 100 units with the impact on schools and traffic and everything else, or a nursing home with no impact on schools and little impact on traffic circulation. So for those reasons, I would respectfully request that the mayor and council affirm the decision of the board based on its findings and conclusions in the record. And I thank you for your hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's not public.
It's not open to the public.
I'm just sitting here. And he's just sitting there.
Okay. Continue? Okay. Okay, so, throughout the past 4 to 6 weeks, I've spent considerable time reviewing the transcripts of all of the planning board meetings regarding capital senior housing application. Additionally, I've read the brief.
There you go, testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, so throughout the past 4 to 6 weeks, I spent considerable time reviewing the transcripts of all of the planning board meetings regarding this capital senior housing application. Additionally, I've read the brief filed last week on behalf of the applicant, and finally tonight, we've heard all of the summation of the appellants and the applicant. So some of this is going to be repetitive because it's already been mentioned, but I took particular notes with regard to all of those hearings that I read through. So I noted some of the actions of the planning board and some of the concessions that were granted. The certificate of need. The applicant supplied the necessary study to obtain a certificate of need as issued by the New Jersey Department of Health. The inherently beneficial use. The applicant offered testimony attesting to the facility being considered as such. The wetlands. First and foremost, the vernal pool and the wetlands will not in any way be disturbed. The Department of Environmental Protection conducted an on-site study and established a 50-foot buffer zone only to be supplemented by an additional 10 feet by the developer. Now a total of 60 feet acts as the buffer. Drainage. There was much discussion regarding drainage from the site. Discussions with the neighboring Syrian church were not productive, nor were discussions with the attorney representing Lakeview. A revised plan making use of an on-site rain garden and detention basin solved the problem, thereby causing Lakeview to withdraw their formal notice of appeal. As far as safety is concerned, the fire department took issues such as truck access around the perimeter of the building and an external standpipe location. All of those were addressed. First aid corps matters, including the expanded size of the elevator, and private ambulance transportations were resolved as well. Employee arrival and departure times to be designed so as to not to interfere with school traffic. A widening of Old Payne Road was afforded to increase safety regarding ingress and egress. As far as trees are concerned, the plan calls for a total of 203 trees to remove, 11 of which 11 are dead and 27 in poor condition. The developer is assessed a total of 304 replacement trees. 166 will be planted on site, and a $90,000 contribution will be made to the town's tree replacement. As noted by Mr. Regan, that is a requirement of our ordinance. With regard to the Garrett Herring House, the developer has agreed to preserve the historic house by moving it to an on-site or off-site location at their expense. Well, that's what a thumbnail sketch of the amount of work and effort that the planning board has put into this application. I realize that there are other issues that people have talked about, but these are the takeaways that I've taken from strict regard to the proceedings of the planning board, and I commend the planning board for their work efforts in moving this plan through the process. I invite other council members to comment as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't mind starting. I have some comments. Can you hear me without that?
Yes.
All right. I have some comments. Over the past 3.5 hours, 2.5 hours, I have some scribble all over the place, so bear with me, please. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past year plus, as Mayor Kramer's planning board representative, I personally attended all planning board meetings and listened to testimony regarding the 244 Old Penn Road application. Councilman Boyce and Councilman Yu attended most meetings as well. Many social media posts stating that the council did not take the time to attend, which is not true. I heard Old Tappan residents and interested parties talk about stormwater management, environmental impacts, residential zoning, traffic, straining our volunteer EMS and fire, removal of hundreds of trees, disturbing the wetlands on the property, and the historic house that sits on this private property. Many legitimate concerns. Although social media was on fire, I was surprised that more residents were not in attendance at these meetings. Although a member of the planning board, I was not able to take part in the discussion as a member of Old Tappan's governing body. Tonight, this council, having heard all the testimony, all the planning board testimony, expert witnesses, comments from both sides of the aisle, and resident concerns, need to make a decision on whether to affirm, overturn, or adjust the recent planning board decision. This group of dedicated men and women also listened to 11 months of testimony, volunteering their own time and based their decision on the testimony, along with our professional planner, borough engineer, and board attorney comments. I thank our board members and our borough professionals for their time and effort on this application. As I stated earlier, there are many concerns with this application. Not the physical building or the need for assisted living facilities, rather its location on this particular piece of property. Unfortunately, I think some of our board members also took into consideration, if not this, potentially what. We heard the phrase inherently beneficial use thrown around and the threat of additional multifamily development due to the unreasonable and unrealistic demands New Jersey is putting on small communities like Old Tappan. In my opinion, some board members looked beyond the building, its location, and sensitivity of the piece of property, and got caught up again, if not this, then what? And the threat of litigation against the borough. Very admirable, but I believe beyond their scope of duty. I think at times you need to stand up to the schoolyard bully. This being the bullies in Trenton, making unrealistic demands on small communities like Old Tappan. Affordable housing and assisted living facilities are extremely important for generations to come. If this application is overruled, the fate of this parcel of land is still uncertain. I am quite familiar with our master plan and the statements that this would be an ideal parcel for the borough to have if it became available. To my knowledge, no such offer was made to the borough. Based on all the testimony I've heard and the concerns of many of our residents, I am going to suggest to my fellow council members that we overturn the recent planning board decision, leaving this parcel zoned for residential use only. Thank you, but the fight is not over. So there's a long road ahead, and it's not as easy and cut and dry as just saying no to this or something. So that's my feeling.
Well, who's gonna go after that?
I'll go. Thank you. I've been on this council for 24 years. I was on this council when we purchased Oaks property. I was here when we purchased Bonnabel property. I was here when we purchased the community garden, which is we purchased from a private homeowner that is right by our senior center now. Some things you need to know, that these properties were available, and the town and Green Acres had the money. Current property was sold. It was not available to the town. And if it was available, I don't think we have the money, although others might disagree. I listened to both sides, and I'm sure both sides have their specific personal reasons for why they want what they want. I'm fifth generation to live here in Old Tappan. I'm fifth generation to live in the house that I live in. And I'm thankful for that. And I know open space is disappearing. But while Trenton has a gun to your head, says your signature or your brains will be on this contract, makes me crazy. So really, your fight is with Trenton, and you need to go to the booth and vote. I'm not telling you who to vote for, I'm just telling you, vote for people who are not in favor of COA. Happens in my mind, I know who those specific people are. You should have to do your own research, because I don't want to turn this into a political discussion, which it isn't. One of my main concerns is strain on EMS and fire. I know this was addressed briefly just now. Sunrise has an agreement with a private ambulance service. That doesn't mean in the middle of the night, someone falls out of bed, that they don't call our ambulance, because they do. Now, if they're being transported somewhere, or going for dialysis, or going, that's a contract. But our ambulance, by the way, there's 2 ambulance board members on this board. My dad was an ambulance member for 47 years. I get it. They're strained, and they're only going to get worse. It's only going to continue to get worse. As far as fire, I'm also a fireman. I've been a fireman for a long time, 47 years. And I have I just know, sure, the standpipes will be right. The going around the back is going to be better because they made it wider. But the constraints on our fire service is getting bad also. For instance, I've been a driver for probably 35 years. I just took myself off the driving list, and there's not many people that drive our ladder truck. I used to be one of them. I'm not, because of the new schooling that we need to do, and new things that we need to keep up on, and I can't because of my work. I can't keep up on all the training. I'm not anti-training, don't get me wrong, but I can't keep up with that, and that's only getting worse every year. They're making training more and more, especially for EMS, but now for fire. So I'm concerned with fire calls there. In the daytime, we have a tough time to get a crew to go anywhere. At 3 o'clock in the morning, it's worse. I'm one of those guilty. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to work in an hour, so I'm not rolling out of bed and going to the firehouse. I used to, can't anymore. So I'm really concerned about that portion of our community being stretched. There's not this, we have an influx of 18 to, let's say, 16 to 21-year-old men and women that join the fire service, and sometimes EMS. They're gung-ho. They got adrenaline popping out of their ears. They're great to see, because I used to be them, and I love to see it. And without them, we don't operate. Am I correct? We don't operate. They know where they're highly trained. They're so into it, but they can't afford to live in Old Japan. So when they become out of college, they can't afford to live here. So we're victims of our own success in a way. I would love to have a portion of land that was just for them, and they can only live there for 4 years, they had to go, or something, but that ain't gonna happen. That's just pie in the sky idea. So, people also mentioned, we're gonna get some COA units out of this. Not enough for my money. Not enough COA units. We're also gonna get taxes. We're gonna get taxes and no kids in school. As a council, we're not anti-kids, but when you have a facility that gives you taxes but no kids in the school, that's a home run for tax base. Our taxes over the last 24 years that I've been here, the average assessed home goes up about, in the municipal portion, between $75 and $125 about. 2020 it went up 0. So, and the enclave is going to give us millions of taxes. Not that there won't be services that are required. We just settled our police contract, so we're hiring more police, but we're only going to have to hire more police when the enclave gets fully developed. By the way, it's sold out. So it'll be, once it's fully developed, there'll be calls for whatever is going on that day. I don't think we need another facility like this in town. And I'm sure that there's case law and there's tests that are satisfied and a lot of other things that are satisfied. But in my heart, I'm not satisfied. So I'm voting no.
Councilman Vaughn.
All right. So, we've been on the council for 24 years. been on the council for 4 months. So I've had to do a lot of catching up. About a year ago, I actually was sitting in the audience as a resident, and still am a resident, listening to the testimony. I think I was there for most of the kind of second half and really trying to get up to speed and listening. And honestly, sitting there, very frustrated, right? You only get 3 minutes to speak, you get interrupted. I know the exact feeling that everyone is in currently, right? And now up here, I still only get 3 minutes, right? But I'll give you my best of 3 minutes. There are a few things here that I want to talk about. So one is infrastructure, right? So I leave it to you guys to talk about infrastructure, EMS, but police too. Right? It's not just fire, it's not just EMS. 911, police go there too, right? So it's our whole infrastructure that would be stressed on 911 calls, et cetera, right? So I agree with you there. To me also, as you know, there are going to be more residents in this town, right? And we do have open space, but what I would like to see is the ratio of open space per resident keep the same, right? And so as our resident count, and look, we can't help it. Enclave is there, the place across the high school is there, right? And I wish as we get more population that we would increase our open space. So I would hope, right, that we could get some more open space either this or elsewhere, right? Two, but the third and last thing that I do want to bring up here, and I don't think anyone has mentioned this over the last year and a half, right? So my background, I don't know if you know, I have 2 degrees in finance, right? Undergrad, graduate degree from Ivy League schools, et cetera. So for 2 minutes, I'm going to be the financial expert here. When this project, right, it's a very simple project for anyone that has a finance degree to model this out. 2 years ago, right, so we started this whole process a year ago, but that means in the offices of CSH, there were financial guys going through and say, okay, is this a profitable project, right? Do you remember 2 years ago what was happening in the markets, in finance, interest rates, et cetera, right? We were all buying Amazon stock at crazy prices. We were all buying GameStop. Stock market was going crazy. Interest rates were what? About 0. Fast forward to where we are today. Well, okay, so projects like this get financed 2 ways. And I've noticed in the application, you have 2 of the largest private equity backers in the U.S. Smart people. You go to Harvard, you probably go to those private equity firms, right? Those private equity firms require a 30% rate of return on any project invested. Minimum. 2 years ago, maybe viable. We all thought we could make 30% in everything, right? With 0 interest rates or maybe 2-3% interest rates, you could use leverage. You could borrow, and you could get that 30% return. Fast forward to today, okay? Take that same project today. Interest rates for that kind of project are 8 to 10%. You will never, ever get a 30% return on a project like this currently. I'm assuming they have not gotten the financing yet because it hasn't been approved, right? So that's 1. 2, the other place to get financing is where? Banks. Do you know what just happened to banks in the last 2 months? Banks went bankrupt. There is no bank that is going to lend in this environment right now. What are they trying to do? They're trying to hold on to their deposits, right? Banks get deposits and they lend. They're trying to hold their deposits so they can survive. So financing of this project is going to be almost nothing. And so my fear, if we do approve it, they won't start that project yet. They could hold on to the land for a period of time. Or, my biggest fear, they start it, steel beams go up, interest rates go up more. Then what happens? They stop. And then we're going to be staring at a half-built facility and we can't do anything after that's done, right? So, and I've been wanting to say this for a very long time, and it's been a year or whatever, but that's my professional financial take of the whole situation. Environmental, I'm not the expert. Construction, I'm not the expert. But in finance, there is no project this year that is going to start in this environment. And yes, there will be worry about it, et cetera. So, you know, with all of this, and obviously you know which way I'm going to vote, I'm going to vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank the members of the public for coming out tonight. And all of us up here recognize that it's your will that we're up here. I want to thank the members of the planning board for their service to our borough. All who have made difficult decisions faithfully, impartially, and justly. Most of them, like us, have been in town most of our lives and have witnessed firsthand how our community has changed over the years. These days, it's difficult to go through a paper or a news website and not read about concerns about overdevelopment, lack of open space, local flooding, etc., and strains on local resources. It seems as if every single municipality in New Jersey, especially in northern New Jersey, is facing the same challenge, and Old Tappan is not immune. And unfortunately, I read all too often that local rulings to deny an application for development become overturned in state superior court. Just remember, just because you don't want it in your town doesn't mean New Jersey doesn't want it in their state. I believe that fact and fear for what else could be developed on the property are amongst the driving factors behind the planning board's decision to approve the application. Should those factors have influenced the board's decision? Probably not. But I believe the board most definitely had the best interests of the residents in mind when making that difficult decision. The decision should have been made on the merits or deficiencies on the proposal and the proposal alone. I have a few concerns about the proposal, but my most significant concern, which wasn't really talked about a lot, is the how it affects the church property adjacent to it. I'm sure all of us know the history about the property. They were both owned by the Korean Presbyterian Church at one time, and 244 Old Tappan Road was never meant to be developed. It was to remain a wooded sanctuary for the congregants to use. It was an unfortunate set of events that led up to the developer gaining ownership of the entire parcel. Early in 2021, the Syrian Orthodox Church purchased the eastern lot where the building is located to become the new home of the Archbishop. To this congregation, this property is considered their most holy, sacred ground. To not completely address their buffer space issues, noise issues, or flooding concerns would be a great failure on our part as the elected stewards of the community. I realize that the applicant has made efforts, but that still doesn't mean that those issues haven't been, those concerns go away. So if this is to move forward, I would encourage the applicant to work with the church further. And you'll hear my vote when we have an official vote.
Thank you. Councilman Carnazza.
I've been here 23 years and 10 months. And I know a lot about COA. When a guy named Christie became governor of this state, he disbanded COA, shut it down, and fired everybody. When another gentleman named Murphy came in, not only did he reinstate COA, he started the Fair Share Housing Authority, and he appointed 14 brainiacs from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and all these intelligent guys. And not only did he reinstated COA, and he made it retroactive, which means he went back 8 years, and you're required to give all those apartments back to each one of the towns. Fair Share Housing Authority went out and did a survey, and they did it with drones on every single town in the state of New Jersey. And when they came to Old Tappan, they said we owe 296 low and medium income apartments. They said we had 136 acres of property in Old Tappan. At the time, John wasn't the mayor, there was another guy here, and he put me and 2 other council people in charge. And I went to the Fair Share Housing Authority, and they did a PowerPoint presentation with these drones. And the first thing they did, they said you have 64 acres on the Wolf Road that Old Tappan owns. I said, could you show that to me, Phil? They showed me the PowerPoint. And it was funny. The camera was taking pictures of all this property, and they had these round things that had white in them. So I said, could you stop it? And they said, yeah. I said, what are all those round things all over the acreage? So the chairman of the Fair Share Housing Authority, which was the Harvard appointee, said, I don't know, what is that, Councilman? I said, well, that's a golf course that we own. It's called the Old Fan Golf Course. His comment to me was, you own a golf course? I said, Chairman, nothing, but really, you should know all about this, because if you're telling me you gotta give 290 apartments, you should know how much property we own. So that 62 acres came off. Stone Point Park, they said you own 38 acres behind Stone Point. Remember? So I said, all right, show it to me. So they did a PowerPoint. The drone is flying over all the acreage, and the camera is reflecting off the ground and coming back at the camera. So I said, could you hold that? They said, yeah. I said, why is the camera reflecting? Could it possibly be that the sun is shining off the water and the water's flying back at your camera? Yeah, it could. We own 38 acres. It's called wetlands. The DEP delineated, we can't use that. To make the long story short,
Please.
the enclave. Who said please? Who said please? Make a long story short, the enclave. Okay. We were sued, and I want everybody to hear this. The state of New Jersey sued us with the developer, and we gave them 41 low and medium income apartments. Mr. Reagan, those 41, because they're rentals, we get double. We had 82 credits. Central Avenue, the guy who bought that property, joined the lawsuit. And in the lawsuit, we gave him 20 townhouses and 6 rentals. We got 12 there. Those credits are good until 2025, but recently, am I allowed to tell them about the 2028?
It's legislation that's...
Legislation is on right now that's going to extend it to 2028.
Hopefully.
So,
Proposed.
hopefully. So our requirement right now might be 30 or 60 or 70. With all that being said, I read, I don't know why I did, because the borough administrator sent all the minutes, I read all that. I read Sherry and Mr. Gambuti, and I also read the appeal. Mr. Reagan, I know you for 24 years that I've been here. I trust your opinion. I am one that I am afraid of what might happen to this property. And at no time ever was this property ever offered for sale to the borough of Old Tappan. Ever. I am voting to uphold the planning board's decision and voting to hold it up. Thank you.
Councilman Boyce.
Okay, so, it's hard to top that amount of enthusiasm. Everybody else on the esteemed council here. But, yeah, so I would like to thank both the appellants and the council for the planning board. I've worked with Mr. Reagan for a number of years, beyond my capacity as a planning board member, and I've always found him to be extremely thorough, highly regarded, and competent. I also know that being a professional in the design industry of landscape architecture, I deal with plans all day long. And I coordinate plans between architects and civil engineers and historians and land use attorneys, and we're always trying to come up with the perfect plan for a site. Now, every site is unique. Our site is unique. And all plans are imperfect because they require compromise. It's a balancing act between thousands of factors to consider. Our municipality produced some incredible orators to come to the planning board and have extremely long sessions of public testimony in defense of preserving the property, preserving the history, preserving the wetlands, preserving the trees, preserving the views of the property, not wanting the traffic. I mean, the list goes on, and all of those factors had to be considered by the applicant civil engineer again and again and again. And I understand why he got a little short, because it's difficult to be in a public testimony position when you have to answer those questions again and again and again. It's very, very stressful. But they were not questions without merit. I do not feel as though this plan is perfectly sensitive to the exact needs of this site. I feel as though it overlooks a lot of opportunities and it could be better. I applaud the planning board of approving the maintenance of the historic home, but not necessarily moving it. I would like to see it stay exactly where it is. The barn, I wouldn't like to see that destroyed. Of course, the wetland, I'd like a 500-foot buffer, but that would be impossible. It would be in the middle of the Syrian Church's parking lot, which is already a parking lot. So the perfect plan doesn't exist. COA, that's a whole nother layer of thing for us to consider as a council. And it's not easy. It's a giant monster that we have to face, you know, every time we redo our master plan. But at the end of the day, I feel as though it's difficult to justify trading one beneficial use, which I believe is a beneficial use. Believe me, from personal experience, it's important to have facilities like this very close to home, but it's impossible to trade one inherently beneficial use for another. And I feel it's that the inherently beneficial use that we have here right now is extremely unique. It has wetlands that feed the aquifer below us. It has uplands that protect the wetlands. There's a system there. It's only 5.5 acres, but it's an important 5.5 acres. I think that the plan that you've been provided by the applicant, they worked so hard on that plan. They made a lot of concessions. Our land use attorney had how many conditions? 36, was it? 36. 36 conditions. That's a lot of conditions. I've never seen a land use attorney create that many conditions of approval. But that being said, I don't think that this current plan is right for this site. And when I'm asked to vote officially, I will. Thank you. There has not been an official vote called yet. That's why I'm not offering what my vote is.
Okay, would someone care to make a motion?
I will make a motion. I'll make a motion that this council rejects, that's a strong word, but the planning board's approval of the 244 site.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilman Benagi?
Yes.
Councilman Boyce?
Well, I mean, we're voting yes in favor of disapproval. Thank you.
Councilman Boyce?
Yes.
Councilman Carnazza?
No.
Councilman Gallagher?
Yes.
Councilman Guan?
Yes.
Councilman Yu?
Yes to overturn.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to open the meeting to the public.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Would anyone from the public care to be heard?
Name for the record.
Well, my name isn't record. It's Robert Zakon, 2121 Avenue, North Japan. I just want to commend the mayor and council for their vote. I think the testimony that you've heard this evening gives you plenty of grounds to vote the way you did this evening. And I commend you for making the right voice, most of you. So I want to thank you very much for the correct vote.
Is there anyone else that cares to be heard? Sir?
We're not adjourned yet.
Not adjourned yet.
Good evening. I'm Peter Ardito. I live in Harrington Park.
We know.
I'm the Board of Directors of Bergen Swan. I do just want to remind all of you that should you have the ability to acquire this property, Bergen Swan is offering $1 million to assist you in acquisition of 244. Old Japan.
Anybody else? Anybody else have deep pockets?
I think this guy volunteered another million.
All right.
Michael Tannen, Old Japan, I ran for town, TANA. Just want to thank you guys for doing the right thing. I ran for council for this project basically alone, and thank you guys for doing the right thing. That's it.
Is there anyone else accused about it? Yes.
Sherry Fonero, 256 Old Japan Road again. I just want to say this has been, you used a perfect word, Mr. Mayor Kramer, when you said, describe this as an arduous task, just to read the transcripts. It has been an arduous task just to get up every day, and I have the perspective and fortune that I see this property for 25 years since I moved here. I moved here because of my property. And to the thought of the destruction of nature, which we're seeing around us wherever we go, and it's a problem nationally, it's certainly a problem. Let's drill down Bergen County, New Jersey, Bergen County, and Old Japan. And Old Japan, when I moved here, I was told, you get more for your money in Old Japan. You know, I bought probably the cheapest house in Old Japan at the time. People thought I was crazy. Old house falling apart, but it had the property. And, you know, I just want to thank everybody for having the foresight of thinking about the future. Because I know many of you grew up playing on this property, playing all over town now that you can't even walk. And one of the things with all the people that are going to be moving in with Enclave, you know, and, you know, for me, I could never move into something that, I mean, it's terrible. There's like 3 little springing trees, you know, where it used to be 20 acres, and I don't know if anybody saw, there were wildflowers in the back of that property. You know, it was raw land. And, you know, besides seeing the animals every day, and where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go eat everything on your house. That's why everybody's putting fences up everywhere. I mean, is that where we want to live? You know, move back to the city. I mean, you really are the stewards of the future of the town and of the lifestyle that we all get to enjoy here. So, like, why shoot ourselves in the foot? And it has nothing to do whether there's not inherent beneficial use of senior living. But, I mean, what was brought up a lot was, nobody even mentioned we already have a senior living facility in town, and it's not fully occupied. So that should be brought to people's attention. You know, unfortunately, with senior living, people come and go. And, you know, I went through it with my mom. You know, many of us have been through this before. But I just want to thank you, because I think what you're doing is going to say something about, it's going to help other towns as well be able to say, no, we don't want this, or we don't want suburban sprawl. We want controlled growth. Yes, we recognize we have to change, but in what direction and who controls it? Is it going to be the developer? Like, the developer is going to decide on the fate of the house, and there's been so much conversation about that. It was making me crazy. You know, we've brought experts that people ignored and were belittled, actually, I have to say, by the planning board. And I'm sure, and not by everybody on the board. Some people absolutely knew their place and took it very seriously. So I just want to say thank you so much. Bergen Swan was the first people to get involved when they heard about this. And they do have over $1 million plus in a fund that's been sitting there 10 years. And I've had conversations with DEP, with Open Space, with Fish and Wildlife. I mean, they know my name. You know, there's departments, and the historic people. There is money okay, all the bad things about the state, there's also a lot of money available because the mandate is to preserve historic sites. The mandate is to preserve open space. The mandate, like almost every town has tree ordinances. You can't just go cut down trees all over because there's value. And go to a nursery and Stokes will know the value of buying just a geranium now who's going up. What does it cost, you know? Oh my God. So I just want to thank you all because I think it's really a tough decision. This is not fly by night and it's not just personal. And we moved here for the same reasons, I think. And I would like future generations, you know, I would like my daughter to be able to come up back and raise a family here, God willing. So just thank you again.
Well, thank you very much. Someone else?
Okay.
8 left.
I just wanted to come and say thank you very much for recognizing the importance of this piece of property, and hopefully we can all work together to try to make it happen for the town. I'm sorry. And be able to do something with it, and hopefully that'll be a reality. I know it's a tough one, and it's a tough fight to continue on, and just wanted to say thank you guys for voting in the way that you did. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mark?
Hi, some of you recognize me. I just want to thank you all for having me, but I think it's...
What's your name and address?
Johan Lager, 694. I'm sorry. Johan Lager, Bravo Alpha Golf Echo Radio.
Okay.
No, I just want to thank you for done what you said, because of course I'm very happy. Some of you may recognize me from having been around for the past, I don't know, almost a year. However, next what we want to do is to see, well, what can we do, all of us, to make the everything much better there?
Makes sense.
And say, you know, we have a historical committee, do they ever meet? Can we activate it?
Yeah, I'm the council liaison, but it's private property, so
Yeah. Well, that can change.
we have no jurisdiction.
We don't have anything to even enter on it? No, I mean, just, oh, I see what
We can only give advice. It's private, just like your house. We can't tell you what to do.
you're... Well, it depends if the price...
Although we-
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else care to be heard?
Motion to close?
Second.
Aye.
So ordered. Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. So ordered.